It's actually a discussion. That's why we kind of have the seats a little bit closer. You're going to be on camera. If you're not on camera, don't want to be on camera, sit right where Damien is. Damien is badass atheist. Don't mess with him. Another joke. He's
Not
a really
mean,
nice
though.
guy.
He's a good guy.
Good guy. Yeah, he's very knowledgeable. Has his own group, and this is going to be a very limited audience on the web anyway. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to have only one person talk at a time. So Dave is going to be presenting a summary of the 8 debates that we've had. We've actually had 9, but he's skipping one. And he's quickly going to go through them, making some solid points from the 8 debates from the Christian side. He has 10 minutes, which John is going to trustworthy, accurately time, and he's going to give us a time. And then after that, we're going to talk about what Dave said for 10 minutes of that particular subject and move on. But one person can speak at a time. If you do speak, make it short. Dave, when you respond to the discussion, try to make it under 30 seconds because we like to have a lot of back and forth. And if you can go ahead and ask a question and have a rebuttal, but after that, let other people talk if there's anybody that wants to talk. And if there's nobody that wants to talk, you can continue the discussion. Just raise your hand, one person at a time. And usually these are very civil discussions. Usually we don't get too emotional. This is a kind of a fact-finding, a way to talk about the differences between us. A lot of us know the differences. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Jeff. Come close. And it's a way of understanding. I believe that if you understand somebody that you believe is a less moral person, less ethical person, and you find out that they're not, that there's a lot of great understanding there. This is Debbie and Jeff from the Backyard Skeptics. Say hello, Debbie and Jeff. Everybody's kind of gone through. Ryan?
Ryan.
He looks like Jeff, but he's Ryan.
Ryan, you're a good double for Jeff with that hat on. Yes. Okay. Very good. Sorry, Ryan. And it brings together the groups in the way of understanding. We might completely disagree with our ideology, but it's a really great idea to have discussions like this. Dave and I have been very successful in having people talk. Afterward, we would go over to the post and we open up the discussion for more understanding. We kind of know already where we're coming from. Atheists don't believe, Christians believe. Reasons why we don't believe and why you do believe are really the great thing about this discussion. You find out why people believe, and it's if you continue the discussion, it's very entertaining. Hi, Delane. Hi, Warren. Yes, that's a VIP section over there. Okay, so we're going to start. Dave, you ready?
I'm ready.
You ready, John?
John? Oh, he's getting his timing thing.
You want me to double check you, John?
Yeah, up there is good. We can see it better.
I'll just start a timer anyway.
You got to plug it in?
I'll just do it.
There we go.
You got it? Okay.
He's got it. And there's no red, right?
No red, so flashing yellow equals red.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, Dave, you got a microphone on?
I suppose it would help if I turned it on.
Yep.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah, I need a mic even if there's only one person in the room. What we're going to do is sometimes we had a debate and one of the sides ended up getting off course, and so there were more than one subject covered during that debate, so I kind of tried to cover all those little rabbit trails along the way. So I eliminated some. We're not going to speak, is this a Christian nation? I think that was handled quite well, and I couldn't improve upon what he said. So there's a few that I'm not going to say anything on, but there were so many little rabbit trails that I thought needed to be addressed. So I'm going to repeat some stuff. Some of you have already heard this, so but there's several that haven't. So just bear with me a little bit, because I try to give a foundation for where we're going. So we have to start somewhere. So we try to start with the origin of the universe. Where did matter come from? Where did the substance of the universe come from? And that's what I asked Stephen Jay Gould one time, the leading evolutionist in this country, maybe in the world, professor at Harvard, biology professor from Harvard. I said, where did the substance of the universe come from? He said, that's not science. I said, well, let's assume we had matter. How do we get life? He said, that's not science. I said, well, let's assume we got life. How did we get higher complexity? And he said, that's not science yet. But the title of his talk was Creativity and Evolution. And his answer was basically that that people in third world countries, they use truck tires, they cut them up and used them for sandals. And the idea behind that is that, well, we don't necessarily use our hands were not designed to play the piano or play the flute. That's just how we use them. But then by that same token, you'd say, well, the eye was not designed for seeing and the ear was not designed for hearing. In other words, there seems to be design in almost everything we see. The first thing is, how did we get matter? Where did the substance of the universe come from? And a lot of people would go back to the Big Bang, some kind of quantum fluctuation of nothingness. Stated simply, nothing packed so tightly together that it blew up and expanded through frictionless space and collapsed to form the stars, galaxies, planets, and moons. First of all, nothingness can't pack together. It'd have no way to push itself into a pile. A vacuum has no density. It said that the nothingness got very dense, and that's why it exploded, but a total vacuum is the opposite of total density. There'd be no ignition to explode the nothingness, no match, couldn't be a chemical explosion. There were no chemicals. Couldn't be a nuclear explosion. There were no atoms, and there's no way to expand it. How can you expand what isn't there? Even if a magical vacuum could somehow be pulled together by gravity, what would cause the pile of emptiness to push outward? The gravity which brought it together would keep it from expanding, and nothingness can't produce heat. So the intense heat caused by the exploding nothingness is said to have changed the nothingness into protons, neutrons, and electrons. First, an empty vacuum in the extreme cold of outer space can't get hot by itself. Second, an empty void can't magically change itself into matter. Third, there can't be any heat without an energy source. And then the gas moving in the same direction is frictionless. In frictionless space, it's too stable for anything to happen except to keep the laws of expanding gas. It's just going to keep going forever. That's one thing that David brought out last week. And then there's nuclear gaps at mass 5 and 8 that make it impossible for hydrogen or helium to change itself into any of the heavier elements. And that gap is something that Dr. William A. Fowler from California Institute of Technology wrote in the sequence of atomic weight, numbers 5 and 8 are vacant. That is, there is no stable atom of mass 5 or 8. The question then is, how can the buildup of elements by neutron capture get by these gaps? And so far, I don't know of any explanation for that. So let's assume we got matter somehow. How do we get life? And of course, normally they say, well, it's spontaneous generation from life to non-life to life, living things. However, Pasteur's demonstration laid the theories of spontaneous generation, they thought, to rest permanently. All of this left sort of an embarrassment for some of the scientists. How had life originated after all, if not through divine creation? There's only two possible ways to explain things, either a theistic explanation or a non-theistic. Either God did it or he didn't. Either it happened naturally or supernaturally. So if you disprove one, you prove the other. And that's what we're trying to look at there. And this is what Isaac Asimov even said, that basically the scientists are back to spontaneous generation, but with a difference. Now they say it's something that happened gradually over a long period of time instead of instantaneously. Well, that's basically we got into a lot of details, but then evidence for design. Let's assume we got matter. Do you want to
do a discussion right now?
I have a point,
Yeah, you want to?
if I may.
Yeah, go ahead. Is this one working?
Yeah, can you hear me there?
Use that one, that's fine.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just one small addendum, and that is that I mentioned in the question of what's the origin, transportation, distribution of carbon, that in the 1940s and 1950s, the posited scenario was called the triple alpha process, whereby we could in fact jump the gap. It would require two helium atoms to come together, form a transitory species of atomic weight 8, and before it could disappear in 10 to the minus 15 seconds, a third one joins them to form carbon 12. The problems are it can only occur at one nuclear resonance, only in red giant stars, and be disseminated only by a supernova. And then I went into the problems of how does that account for miles deep, thousands of miles long solid coal beds several places throughout the Earth, and so forth.
That's what I was going to say. So let's assume, okay, we got.
Did you want to talk right now, or?
Oh.
Split it up? We're going to split it up into the debates. Did you want to combine two debates?
Well, yeah, the first and second one kind of go together,
Okay?
but, yeah, go ahead.
So, I'm sorry to, I have a question about your comment there.
Yep.
So your argument is that red giant stars are the only possible method of jumping the 5 and 8 gap, and therefore it can't happen?
The only method that has been posited to date for the production of carbon
Right.
is one nuclear resonance and only in red giant stars, and it can only be disseminated by a supernova.
Okay,
There
so-
is no
so
other
I-
process posited by the
I
triple.
don't understand. So are you saying that red giant stars do not go to supernova and do not therefore generate carbon?
No, I'm saying the only place the carbon can come from is red giant stars, and only
Okay.
those that supernova can disseminate that carbon.
Okay, I think that's a pretty established fact.
But it was
Astronomy.
an addendum to the statement about the mass gaps, because the mass gap at 5 and 8 would assume that you can't even get any carbon at all, even by a triple alpha process, but the triple alpha process was that which was posited to solve that problem. But it has those detriments that go along with it that I mentioned.
And the detriments are,
It can only occur at one nuclear resonance, only in red giant stars, and be disseminated only by supernova, and it doesn't seem to explain, as far as I'm concerned, miles deep, thousands of miles long, solid coal beds several places throughout the Earth, among many other things.
so if you are talking about red giant stars, so you have to, I mean, we're assuming that if you come from the Big Bang and there's only hydrogen, and then the only stars are essentially going to be red giant stars, then all stars in the universe are going to be red giant stars, going to get supernova. You're talking about 14 billion years. You still don't think there's enough time to generate red giant stars, create enough supernova, and over 14 billion years, generate enough carbon on the Earth to build up a
One of the-
coal substrate?
One of the biggest problems
That's
is that
true.
there aren't that many supernova. Even if you count all the ones that were distant, you still don't have very many, and we've only seen 4 of them live.
Define very many. I mean, like in the last 100 years, or in our galaxy, in the entire universe? I mean,
There have only been 4,
you're making
Observed-
value judgments without any
No.
boundaries.
trying to answer the question. There have only been 4 observed supernova that were observed in situ, and all the rest of them that we have any evidence for have been, they
What do you
existed a
mean-
long time ago.
I'm sorry, what do you mean observed in situ?
That is, we could essentially see the camera rolling as the supernova was occurring, as opposed to seeing only the remnants of
Right,
one.
You're talking about in the last 20 years, 80 years? What are you talking
Thousand.
about?
Does this
1,000
include the
years.
one 2 months ago?
I don't know what the ones,
that Southern Methodist University picked up.
we'd have to define whether or not that was one of the distant ones, or whether it was, but as far as I know, there was still only the one in 1054, 1572, 1604, and 1987. The only ones that were in situ.
Wait, so you're discounting every supernova that we've seen in the Andromeda galaxy or any other galaxy? You're basically
I'm not
just discounting those.
I'm not discounting them, I'm saying we didn't see them in situ, we only
We
saw the
see them
remnants.
all the time.
No, we don't. We only see the remnants of them. That was a fine point that I had to learn a few weeks ago.
No, we see the remnants
Okay, well-
of nearby ones. The most recent nearby one that we saw as it was happening was 1987A.
Okay, all right.
So
Well-
what do you do with all the ones that we haven't seen? Because we haven't, there are many that have occurred that we haven't seen. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer,
You-
isn't it?
Before we had
Your
telescopes?
statements
Mhm.
I'm sorry, your statements are completely at odds with modern astronomy. I mean, we detect a supernova all the time in distant galaxies. We see them all the time,
Okay, well, we'll have to.
as they're happening.
All right, well, we can,
We're gonna disagree, we're just
well,
agree
well,
to
for
disagree
now,
on that? Okay.
for now, but I mean, I'm an empiricist, and we'll examine things later as it were. I mean, if you got evidence, we'll certainly look at it. But the main point I'm trying to drive at, however, is that the supernova will still explode everything in all directions. It won't concentrate anywhere. It won't be jetting all of its, none of these, even in combination, will be jetting all the results to the Earth and primarily there to produce the results.
Well, these supernova obviously are not jetting their results to the Earth, because these supernova are generating clouds of gas. And after billions of years, these various clouds of gas combine to become the Earth, right? It's not, you're making the assumption that the Earth was here, and supernova, like, sent carbon to Earth. Is that what? Is that your hypothesis?
We
that
have no
the
other
Earth
place-
existed and then carbon
There's only one place
rained
to get the
down?
carbon from, and that's red giant stars that supernova. There is no other
I
place to
agree
get it
with
from.
you on that. I absolutely agree with you on that.
Good.
That's
As
agreed.
far as the triple alpha process that's hypothesized goes.
I'm sorry, I'm not an astrophysicist. I don't know what the triple alpha process is. I think it's irrelevant to this discussion, just by the
No, it
way.
isn't. In fact, I described it. The triple alpha process is where two helium atoms come together, form a transitory species of atomic weight 8, 4 and 4 is 8,
Mhm.
before it can before that transitory species can disintegrate back into helium, a third one joins the fray. It's an
Right.
extremely improbable process on top of everything else.
So improbable in what realm? You have to, if there's 4 atoms bouncing around, obviously that's improbable, but if there's a quadrillion atoms bouncing around in the space of this room, it probably the probability goes up, doesn't it?
Well, the corresponding phenomena in chemistry that is about transitory species is also.
We're not talking about chemistry though.
I'm trying to-
We're talking about nuclear physics.
Okay, I would like to finish, please.
But chemistry is ionic bonds. Okay.
I understand that that's the case. I'm just trying to say that the time scale of 10 to the minus 15 seconds before it can disseminate is what is regarded as being the improbable element here. It's not that they form together and stick together for a long period of time until until another helium atom is waiting to come along. Instead, it has to take place very quickly.
And we have 3 more minutes for this particular discussion. Anybody
Yes.
have any other questions?
One thing, I think a lot of us don't have the background that you do, but one thing I think that I just grabbed a hold of with this, a little scientific background is that I studied Einstein a little bit, and I know that he was a strong believer in God because he saw so many ways that things did not just happen by chance, but they were just amazing that they could come together. And I know his one statement was, God doesn't play dice with the universe, but he just was so strongly believed that there had to be some reason behind what happened because of all of the amazing ways that we have gravity and the different laws of the universe that just seem like they just couldn't happen by chance. So I think for me, I don't feel like I need to know all the technical things, but when I see somebody who does, that I can believe in Einstein, even though he wasn't a particularly religious person, that he did believe in God, that to me is evidence for
Anyone else?
for
I'd like to make a question though, well, not a question, but it's more of a statement. I think that what Dave is going on is a God of the gaps. He's saying that we don't understand it. He'll disagree with that, but
I
believe
will.
it's a God of the gaps. I think that if we had a nuclear physicist or an astrophysicist in here, he would explain very clearly and be a great debater. In fact, I suggest that we get an astrophysicist in to debate Dave on all of these points. And what is the real issue is here is that you're saying that God created the carbon, Dave? Is that what you're saying?
Throughout the discussions, I'm not making conclusions.
Yes, I know, but you're leading to a red herring.
No, I'm not.
The real issue in all, your entire debate, it was brought up on a red herring issue, is that you would say something and not have a conclusion, but your obvious issue is that God did it. So are you going to now say, God did it, or are you going to say, we don't understand it, let's roll up our sleeve and find out about it? One way you say God did it, and you don't go look, because you already believe. The other way, you get to work, spend the effort and the time within the scientific community and find an answer. Which way do you want to go?
I don't go either of those two ways at all. The reason I kept saying what I did is, since I'm taking the empirical position, I'm not entertaining notions
But you're
of
coming
what the
to a
final answer would
conclusion.
have to, because the rest of it would be belief, and belief is not in the realm of empiricism. I'm constraining myself to empiricism and
So
saying.
you're saying it's a question then, right?
I'm saying that the current state of affairs is such that the proposed solutions fall short vastly of known laws of physics, physics and chemistry and mathematics, and that is the point that I
And I
continually
think that
make.
would be the correct time to conclude,
Okay.
and I promise I will look for an astrophysicist to debate you, and I hope both of you can bring it down to our level, so we can all understand it. And we're time for the next section, which was number 2 debate, and this
Okay.
is evidence for design, right?
Evidence
That's
for
it.
design. Of course, here we look at some of the design in living things, and proteins depend upon DNA for the formation. DNA can't form without protein, pre-existing proteins. Sagan called this a biological treadmill. As S.W. Fox wrote, some of the key questions of the origin of life concern the primordial sequence of the nucleic acid, protein, and cell, which came first. Whichever postulate has been considered, some have seemed to leave it this unresolved question. One principal dilemma has comprised the two reflexive questions of how nucleic acids might have arisen without enzymes to make them, or alternatively, how enzymic protein might have arisen without nucleic acid to direct the sequence of monomers. If both sufficient DNA to code the 124 proteins necessary and sufficient protein, 124, to house and catalyze the DNA independently evolved and subsequently associated together to form the first living entity, their individual probabilities must be multiplied. And the total probability would be 1 over 10 to the 89,190th. That's the probability of forming DNA times 1 over 10 to the 78,436 power. You add these exponents, the probability of forming 124 proteins, you get 1 over 10 to the 167,626 power, assuming 1 million Earths around every star in the universe. And of course, that's just to get the simplest form. Even a bacteria in your intestine has much more.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought this meeting was supposed to be answering atheist questions.
Yeah.
This is presenting Christianity's arguments, not answering atheist questions.
Right.
When are we going to get to the part where you're answering atheist questions?
Okay, well, that's a good question.
I'd like to make a response to the Einstein thing.
One issue at a time.
Yeah.
One issue at a time.
Yeah, we moved on.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to get to the
Okay,
Einstein
Dave.
quote.
You have to, would you
Okay.
answer,
Let me finish this. This is kind of an introductory thing. Yes, I'm going to get to those questions.
yes, the format is for him to do a review and then for us to ask questions. And I think that the objections that Dave and I were talking about was that we would bring up the objections of what he was saying and add to our own to that subject.
Just trying to lay a foundation here, and then we're going to get to those questions. But
So let's ask
appreciate your
questions
answer.
after Dave's presentations. It's going to be 8 segments.
Okay, then we have the first cells. Assuming that you, by impossible odds, now you can only cram 10 to the 130th power electrons in the known universe. But if, despite virtually impossible odds, proteins arose by chance processes, there's not the remotest reason to believe that they would form a membrane-encased, self-reproducing, self-repairing, metabolizing living cell. There's no evidence that any stable state exists between the assumed naturalistic formation of proteins and the formation of first living cell. This is what caused Michael Behe to jump ship. He's a cell biologist, wrote Darwin's Black Box. And no scientist has ever demonstrated this fantastic jump in complexity. It could have happened even with the entire universe being filled with proteins. There's a biochemistry of a single cell. This isn't even complete. So not only that, but we've got buffers, barriers, and chemical pathways. Living cells contain thousands of different chemicals, some acidic, some basic. Some chemicals would react to others if it weren't for the intricate system of chemical barriers and buffers. If living things evolved, these barriers and buffers must also have evolved, and just at the right time to prevent these harmful chemical reactions. How could precise, seemingly coordinated, almost miraculous events have happened for each of millions of species? All living organisms are maintained by thousands of chemical pathways, each involving a long series of chemical complex reactions. For example, clotting of blood involves between 20 and 30 steps, absolutely vital to the healing of a wound. However, clotting could be fatal if it happened inside the body. Omitting many steps, inserting an unwanted step, or altering the timing of a step would probably cause death. If one thing, this rat poison actually interrupts the sequence of these steps. If one thing goes wrong, all earlier marvelous steps that worked flawlessly were in vain. Evidently, these complex pathways were created as an intricate, highly integrated system. The chemical evolution of life, as you see here, one should begin with an Earth having high concentrations of key elements comprising life, such as carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. However, as one more closely examines these elements, the more unlikely the evolution occurs. For example, rocks that supposedly preceded life have very little carbon. One must imagine a toxic carbon-rich atmosphere to supply the needed carbon if life evolved. And of course, today's atmosphere holds about 1/80,000th of the carbon that has been on the Earth's surface since the fossils were first formed. And we could go into oxygen. I'm not going to go into all of these. Fred Hoyle wrote in The New Scientist that 2,000 different and very complex enzymes are required for a living organism to exist. Then he added that the random shuffling process could not form a single one of these in even 20 billion years. He then added this: I don't know how long it's going to be before astronomers generally recognize that the arrangement of not even one among the many thousands of biopolymers, enzymes, proteins, hormones on which life depends could have arrived here by natural processes here on Earth. Now, what Fred Hoyle believed is that the entire universe was made of some kind of organic matter and it somehow came to Earth. But he didn't believe it would happen naturally, not here. Astronomers still have little difficulty in understanding this because they will be assured by the biologists that it's not so, and this is what we find. Biologists have been assured that, in their turn, by others that it's not so. The others, in other words, each group is supposedly supporting someone else's presuppositions, but you can't be an expert in everything. So,
Or even one thing.
yeah, sometimes Henry Morris used to say it's really tough to be an expert in just even one thing. As Stephen Jay Gould said, the extreme rarity, and of course, of additional forms, and he's talking about the...
Those are not very visible, you might want to read them.
Wow, Dave.
Yeah,
Need help on your PowerPoint there.
yeah.
You've got a purple background with purple text.
Oh, no. Yeah, I can see it here, but it's not. Get that out of the way.
We can just assume you're quoting him out of context and move on.
He says the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not evidence of the fossils. What Stephen Gould and Niles Eldridge, Stephen Stanley, Colin Patterson, all of these...
Stephen Gould. He's dead. Didn't he die in the 70s?
2002.
No, in fact, I knew Stephen Gould. And used to talk to him on the phone.
Well, that article is
Can you quote anything more recent than 1977?
Oh, yeah. But the thing is, it's still true today. There is no known law, no known process, no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. This is Dr. Werner Gett. He was probably one of the leading scientists even today on information. So what Stephen Gould is saying is what all of the leading paleontologists they're the curators of the greatest museums in the world. Colin Patterson at the University at London, Niles Eldridge, I think he's at the Smith, he's at the,
2 minutes left for the segment.
and these gentlemen are, if anybody would recognize a transitional form, Stephen Stanley, Niles Eldridge, Stephen Gould, Colin Patterson. Colin Patterson wrote a book called Evolution, and in the book he basically didn't include any transitional forms because he said, well, if he'd had any transitional forms, he would have loved to include them. And that's what Luther Sutherland wrote back. He said, I noticed and you didn't include any transitional forms in your book. He says, I wouldn't even know how to tell an artist to draw one because, first of all, a transitional form itself isn't really designed to survive in any kind of environment. It's kind of in transition, but not only does it have to survive, it has to be the only one to survive. It's the least capable of surviving. So that's the reason why these, probably the leading authorities in the area would recognize a transitional form, say we don't have any. So that's where he comes up with this punctuated equilibrium, which is an offshoot of the Hofel-Monster mechanism, which Austin Clarke basically recognized this as well. He said, if you're going to believe in evolution, there's no such thing as cross-species evolution. In other words, you've got all of the organs in the body. How are you going to go from one kind to another kind? You're going to have to somehow take that organ out, replace it with another organ. He says, if you're going to believe in evolution, it's going to start with, and this is plants and animals, from dirt and water. At least that's what Austin Clarke, one of the leading scientists at the Smithsonian Institute. That was the same year that Richard Goldschmidt gave up. He gave up because he said, after trying to get fruit flies to change into something other than a fruit fly. For 25 years, he bombarded fruit flies with chemicals and with radiation, and he was not able to get any kind of transitional form. So,
Is that the argument from 50s B movies?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
He bombarded fruit flies with radiation to try and get them to turn into something other than fruit flies?
Well, you got to speed up the mutation process somehow. And so basically, what is a mutation? It's like shooting a bullet at a chromosome and destroying some of the information. It's not, you're jumbling it up. It's not adding any new teleonomy or specific information to the genetic code. It's simply jumbling up the information that's there.
Information works.
What do we?
And a test to do it for 20, 30, 50 years is not the same as 10,000. Not the same as 1,000. Not the same as 100. I mean, the fact that you can't change something in a short period of time has no relevance in the long term of what evolution could be true or untrue.
Well, the thing is, what he's doing, he said this would have included more generations than man and his man's supposed ancestors have been alive on this earth. So the idea is that if you can't,
That's obviously not true. I mean, that doesn't
that's what he said.
Doesn't even make any sense. Can we go back one slide to your last list of the laws of information? The laws of information slide.
oh, okay.
So,
Yeah,
so,
this
so
this
can
is.
you talk about your laws of information here, because I'm not aware of any school of science which has these laws as part of its.
Okay, this is Warner Gitt. He said anything.
Okay, so Warner Gitt.
Yeah.
And he's who?
Warner Gitt wrote in the beginning was
Okay, so
information.
he wrote a book, and so he wrote his laws in his book. Okay, so anything material, such as physical or chemical processes, cannot create something non-material. I'm sort of at a loss. What does that even mean? Cannot create. So you're saying so a computer, which is material, right, which uses electrons, which are so are electrons material or non-material in your definition?
Okay, what he's saying here is that, for example, information is not material.
Well, no. So information is the difference of states of an electron from one moment in time to the next. That's information.
Well,
right? That's how computers work, right? We have electrons there in one state.
Let me
change them to another state. That change in state is information. That's a material change in a computer, which generates a non-material change in information.
Yes, information itself is not material. Thank you. For example, you can take your memory stick, you take a bunch of pictures, take a bunch of movies, take your memory stick out, or first of all weigh it, then put it in your computer, erase everything there, put it on a scale, it's going to weigh the same as it did before. In other words, information is not matter. Now it can attach itself to matter, but the information itself is not matter, material.
Like one of the things that I was trying to point out, this is the last of the topics that I covered last month. The way I define it is slightly different. Information requires a receiver tuned to a sender tuned to a receiver, and a medium that promotes rather than interferes with the communication. There also must be a language or context within which the information is understood.
You're proposing a definition which is completely, that's not even remotely how information works.
I didn't say so at all.
I mean, have either of you done any study on information complexity theory, like computer science or anything? Have you done any study on entropy?
Mm-hmm, I have.
Information and entropy are the same thing. So
No, entropy is a measure of the disorder of information.
entropy is the inverse of
It
information.
is comparable to entropy in the thermodynamic world. And it's the same form.
Information is encoded as a change in state. That's what information is. So what you're saying here is that anything material cannot create something non-material. Is saying that anything material can't change.
Well,
I mean, that's obviously,
I don't know that I agree with you.
I would assume that's what you're saying.
I don't even know if I agree with you. And that's if something maintains its state, it's still information. It doesn't have to change to be information. I could have a string of A's and it would still be information if it was understood in context. The point is that there has to be transmission.
Information is how do you encode it, right? So what you encode the changes in the information. That's what if you look at Kelly coding.
Yeah.
Anyway.
David?
Yeah.
Did I hear you say that you know of no transitional forms of evolution?
Right.
Okay.
I do say that. We're going to get to that when we get.
Oh,
Well, but you already said it.
you already said it, and I'm just wondering how you explain whale femurs. Or do you say they're not?
Were you there when we had that? I brought
Yes.
up a slide,
Yes.
which basically, yeah, that.
And I thought those professors did a very good job of explaining evolution.
You're
That's
saying
what I took away from it,
whale evolution,
yes.
and what are you saying? There was a study done at Berkeley.
Well, there are structures within the whale that indicate that that was a walking animal at one time, correct?
No,
Okay.
no.
You're
That-
saying no, but I think
Right, there-
research says
I
yes.
can show you some slides I've got
But
on
there are
that.
fossils from proto whales that had more walking structures than
Yes,
modern
and
whales.
even modern whales
And you
have,
can find
have the best.
further
They
back
were
other-
trying to
other
find something that the
fossils.
fins that looked like they were legs, but they weren't attached to any bone structure, so that was not, it couldn't have been a leg. It couldn't have been used for that.
There's actually compelling evidence that the hippopotamus is in a transitional form right now from a land animal to an aquatic animal, and that's why it is able to communicate both above the water and below the water, just as whales are able to do. So, I mean, the
I can't,
idea
that
there is no
sounds
transitional
a little bit
is just
ridiculous to me.
false, because they're actually living transitional species right now.
It doesn't look like it's in transition.
It
Well,
is.
What is your definition of transition? Let's start there.
Yeah. How do you define a transitional species?
Well, I'm just quoting from the probably 4 leading paleontologists that I know who say there are no transitional forms as far as they're concerned.
Which would be who? You're saying Stephen Gould?
Colin
Are you
Passage.
saying Stephen Gould said that there's no such thing as a transitional species?
Well, yes, that's what he said.
That's, okay.
You know, that's a little.
That's a complete,
Well-
that's a complete fabrication. There's no,
Absolutely.
that's not even remotely true. And if you've read any
That's the
Stephen Gould-
reason-
If you've read any Stephen Gould at all, you know that is completely untrue.
Well, it's not just reading him, I knew him. We talked about this.
Knowing him is not the same as understanding his research.
Yeah, well,
Do you have the actual?
Kurt Wise
do you have a
was
quote?
was
Do you
one
have
of
the-
his.
you have the actual
Transitional
quote
fossils
or an
different.
article
There's no
that he
such
states that in distinctly, not hearsay?
You mean other than the 77 quote?
Well, even the 77.
The 77 quote, which is 40 years old because science has not progressed in 40 years, but yes, other than 77 quote.
I think I was asking for him. Well, I wouldn't be able to speak on it directly, although I do know that Stephen Gould tended to walk away from any such inference that he would hold in a direction of creationism. But it's hard, however, to actually walk away from a quote like that, no matter what the context is.
Kurt Wise
Can we
was.
can we put that quote back up on the screen? so
Trade
we could
secret
actually
quote, I think.
talk
Kurt-
about the actual quote that he supposedly made, even though it's incredibly hard to read. So the extreme.
Nope. 2 more. There you go.
Here, let me help out with that a little bit.
Got 2 minutes on this discussion.
There we go.
Rarity.
It's not an impossibility, it's rare.
Okay, so the extreme rarity of transitional forms. He doesn't say they don't exist. He says the extreme rarity of them, which means it's hard to find. In the record, persists as the trade secret of paleontology. I'm not sure what he means there. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips of the nodes, meaning the tips of the nodes are the things that we have found, and we draw inferences between them. The rest is inference,
Well-
reasonable, not the evidence of fossils.
Kurt
So,
Wise got his
at what
PhD
point
at.
does he say there that transitional fossils don't exist? It's pretty clear to me that he says transitional fossils do exist.
Well, what he's saying is at the tips and the nodes, what he's saying is the same thing that we creationists would say, yeah, variation within the kind, there is that.
No, he's saying
But that's-
we found fossils. We found these fossils and we arranged them in a tree. We found fossils. We got this cloud. We got to draw lines between them because I can't find the fish and the mother of the fish and the mother of that fish and the mother of that fish, right? I found this fish and I found a fish a million years prior to that, which is extremely similar. So I've got to infer a line of descent. got to draw a line of descent. But then when I find a second fossil which goes right in between those two, that's a transitional fossil. That becomes another node in the tip and the nodes. Now we've got a tip, and instead of one node, we've got two nodes.
Well, as Darwin said, if you could show that evolution couldn't happen gradually, and this is Charles Lyell's, uniformitarian model, if you could show that this didn't happen gradually, his theory would totally break down. Well, that's what Stephen Gould is saying. He's saying you
That's
can't
not
show
what
it.
Stephen Gould is saying.
The evolutionary tree in our...
He's saying what we've
is-
found. What we found is what we show when we draw the tree of evidence.
So what Stephen
Tree
Jay
of
Gould
evidence
is saying,
drawn
every
based on what we
50,000
found.
years or so, what he's saying is that you're going to have literally millions of mutations. All of a sudden, it's going to jump from one kind to another kind. That's his hopeful monster mechanism.
And that
That's
poem was in
not-
1967.
That's his
Any
punctuated
transitional
equilibrium.
species has been
That's a
found.
deliberate
Anyway,
misrepresentation of punctuated equilibrium.
Hundreds of thousands of years that cannot be. So we're gonna go to the next topic. Are you ready, Dave, for the next one?
yeah,
We're gonna have an open discussion, hopefully, for all sorts
well, I
of
was going to get
topics.
into the whole concept of mutations, but we don't have time for that.
Summarize it, that's right. So then the three debate is what you're gonna go for now?
Yeah, here's that creation of, the what we see is actually a creation forest, not the so-called evolutionary tree that was in Darwin's Origin of Species. So these are part of design, immune system, all of these things are part of what I would call design in nature. And entropy always is going the wrong direction for the evolutionist. So now we get to the story of Genesis, and I'm going to skip that one for now and go into the one that was probably the most difficult, was the does God answer prayer, debate number 4. The atheist says, maybe not all of them, but they're quoting, Jesus makes a number of specific, remarkable promises having to do with prayer. For example, in Matthew 7:7, Jesus says, ask and it will be given unto you, seek and you shall find, knock and it will be opened unto you. For everyone who asks, receive, he who seeks, finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man of you, if his son asks him for bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more your heavenly Father give good gifts to those that ask him. Matthew 17:20, Jesus reiterates the same message. For truly I say to you, if you have a faith as a grain of mustard seed, you'll say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it'll move. Nothing shall be impossible. He says similar things in other places. Do not doubt. Not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but you can also say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask in prayer. Jesus says even more straightforward in Mark 11:24, therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you received it and it shall be yours. However, when you look at the world around you, and this would be the atheist speaking, this is kind of what we heard, it's kind of a summary of what we heard in that debate. God never answers prayers of amputees. If he did, we would see amputee limbs spontaneously regenerating every day. God never moves mountains. If he did, we would see mountains moving all around all the time. God never answers impossible prayers. If he did, people would be flying around like Superman on a regular basis. God never answers prayers that turn people into puppets. If he did, you're a puppet. God never answers prayers that break the laws of nature. If he did, scientific equations and computer models would have to take God's random annex into account. God never answers prayers that break the laws of probability. If he did, every believer would be rich and Las Vegas could not exist. When two people pray opposite one another, obviously someone's prayer will go unanswered. If 1 million people pray the same thing, but only one can have it, then by definition, 999,999 people will have their prayers unanswered. God doesn't answer medical prayers, otherwise the U.S. would not need to spend $2 trillion a year on health care. God doesn't answer prayers to avert natural disasters. If he did, hurricanes would not hit the U.S. So, what's our Christian answer?
That's pretty good. I think you're an atheist in disguise.
Pretty summed it up pretty well, didn't I?
I don't think I would disagree with anything that.
We try to be fair here. First case, an atheist, I'm not assuming everybody, but atheists can only assume that God does not exist. He can't prove it. In other words, wherever you,
Not our
No
bargain of proof.
comments yet, please, guys. Hold your comments.
The assumption, that's all.
I gotta-
but once this belief is in place, all evidence and arguments for God must be filtered through that paradigm. For example, prayer then could not possibly work because God existed. Second, how would atheists judge whether or not prayer works? Do they want repeatable experiments and regular quantifiable data so that the efficacy of prayer can be tested and measured?
Yes.
That would be a problem.
Well, there's been 9 to
No comments. Sorry, guys.
Instead, it would be, thanks, Bruce. Instead, it would be a demonstration that uttering certain words in certain patterns brings certain results. We call this phenomenon sorcery. It doesn't necessarily mean God did it. It means that this happened. Now, we may not be able to explain how it did. It happened, but it did. The Bible says that God hides himself from the proud, James 4:6. The atheist has a problem with both answered and unanswered prayer. Here's a scenario that no doubt happens daily somewhere in the world. A young boy becomes deathly ill. The entire family gathers for prayer. However, despite the earnest and sincere prayer, the child tragically dies. Their explanation for death is that God took him to heaven because he wanted the child there. That's seen as the atheist as unanswered prayer. Or the child miraculously makes a recovery, which the family hails as an evident miracle. God obviously answered the family's prayer by saving the child from death. The atheist maintains that it wasn't answered prayer, but that the child recovered because the body healed itself. Now, I own a Chrysler 300. Let's say it has a problem. It has a lot of problems, actually. But what would be my intellectual capacity if I concluded that if no manufacturer, there's no manufacturer simply because I couldn't contact him about the dilemma?
We would send you to an insane asylum.
The fact of their existence, for example, has nothing to do with whether or not they return my calls. Neither does God's existence have anything to do with the fact that there are those who have experienced miracles, seen visions, or supposedly heard his voice. The sun doesn't exist because we see its light or because we feel its warmth. Its existence has nothing to do with any human testimony, nor does it cease to exist because a blind man is unaware of its reality. So we have to look at the question, how can we prove that God answers prayer? Well, God gives some reasons here, certain reasons for result in breaking a vow. These are names of Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. Dishonoring parents, secret sin, pride, lustful motives, desiring to be rich, committing adultery, unbelief, unforgiving spirit, repaying evil for good. These are things that would cause God to not answer that prayer, according to the Bible. So let's look at who has been successful in appealing to God. And there's certain prayers that God always answers. This was an encouragement to me when I was sitting there thinking about what you guys brought up, because there were certain prayers that God always answers. The prayers that he has already told us he wants us for. You know, he that asks for wisdom, he that asks for
He who asks for wisdom, are you telling me every Christian is smart?
well,
Dave?
yeah.
To stay on track.
Okay.
Ignore the atheist for now.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
We have to wait
I'm
until the
sorry.
discussion time. I'm
Oh, yeah.
sorry, guys. I'm trying to make it a little
Thanks, Bruce.
somewhat organized.
Yeah.
He's moving so fast it's hard to keep track of
You
all
only
the...
have 3 minutes, Dave, so you better wrap it up.
Okay, so if you ask for wisdom, God says he will give to all men liberally, and he upbraideth not. In other words, he won't criticize you for asking. And so that says that in James. Well, there are certain things that God will answer. If I really ask him, he will answer that in a positive way. There are other things that, so it's an encouragement to pray, because I know that that's already in God's will. Here's some those who appeal to God. Who was successful in appealing to God? I was able to save a nation because I reminded God that his reputation would be damaged if the nation was destroyed. Moses. God answered my appeal for funds to rebuild. I based my prayer on a promise that I found in God's word. Nehemiah. I prayed that God would prosper his people by bringing remnant back to the promised land. My prayer was based on what I discerned from Scripture to be God's will. Daniel. God's answered my prayers for personal funds, ministry funds for the people.
Can't do wealth.
Huh?
They said God won't answer prayers of wealth. He just said he answered for personal funds.
Funds, ministry funds through people whose lives I had invested God's word. Paul was asking for help for the church. I asked the Lord about a need for paying taxes. He supplied the money in a very unusual way. Catch a fish and get a coin out of its mouth. I appealed to God for a son after many years. It came to the place of having no will of my own. Following this, God supernaturally gave me a son. Now, I know most of you atheists probably know the Bible better than most Christians, so I'm not quoting something that you're not familiar with. But must we be in right standing with God? God gives rain, sunshine, breath, health to non-Christian as well as a Christian. However, the first words of the Lord's Prayer must be true before we can expect God to hear special petitions. He must be our Father who is in heaven. We become members of his family by faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ for our personal salvation. Only then are we in right standing. Our request must be based on the name of Christ. Our request must be inconsistent with who he is. He's in the light of the world, so he will expose rather than bless a shady business deal. We must base our appeal on guarding God's reputation. God is committed to protecting his own reputation. When the Syrians said, the Lord is God of the hills, but he is not God of the valleys, therefore I will deliver all this great multitude into thine hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord. The authority of our appeal must be God's word. For thou hast magnified thy word above all thy name. Remember, I beseech thee, the word that thou commendest thy servant Moses, saying, if ye transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations. But if you turn unto me and keep my commandments, I will gather them from thence, and will bring them unto the place that thou hast chosen. Now these are thy servants and thy people, whom thou hast redeemed in thy great power. That's Nehemiah. Our appeal must be based on the clear will of God. Thy will be done as earth as it is in heaven. So, we must, I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm going to take over just for a moment. Keep your questions. I forgot to ask. We have to pass the hat because this room costs money. So if you're enjoying what you're seeing right now, give a lot. If you're not, give some. I'll start with Dave. $2 to $5 would probably do it for everybody. Thanks, guys. And I'd like to start.
Does that mean you didn't have to collect last month?
I forgot, and that's why everybody should pay double for this month. No, anybody who was here last month could pay double. Just pass it back there, it's fine. Dave, I'm going to respond before we get this.
Sure.
I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Let's say that one Christian sect does have their prayer answered more than others, since there's so many different sects around. God could say, well, they're the right ones. And let's say that it was randomly Jehovah's Witness sect, that if you walked into a hospital and you said to the nurse, I'm a Jehovah's Witness, and the nurse said, well, they get out of here 30% more quicker. And we've seen this happen over the last few decades, and other hospitals would agree with that. That would be evidence that could be empirically tested. And I think that it's human nature to see the hits of the prayers being answered and discount the misses. I think that that's just part of our psychology. I think that everybody does it no matter what religion they're at. I also think that everybody with the equivalent health care would have their prayers answered equally no matter what religion they are in the entire world. It would be wonderful to have one religion have their prayers answered. It would be fantastic. Just think of the billions of dollars going into that study. What makes these Jehovah's Witnesses tick? Why don't they get cancer as much? Why are they healed? We look at their heredity. We look at their lifestyle. We look at the air that they breathe in different areas of the world. We look at their diet. And if nothing came up naturally over a long period of time, it would be leaning towards supernatural. But let's just say that they did find something natural, something about the Jehovah's Witness. Do you think that the Jehovah's Witness headquarters would actually release that information? Or would they say, let's keep it as a supernatural? I think that there's a movie to be made about that somewhere. So now let's open it up, Damien and
Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses only believe there's 144,000 people that get to go to heaven, right? So they probably want to
there's
keep.
3 different heavens.
They want to keep. They want to keep.
That's
They,
more.
they would want to keep that circle small, so only their friends get in.
Yeah.
But
Well, there's
Problem is they've already
multitude of
overpopulated
stories from
it.
any sect that you choose from for the 144,000.
I wanted to respond to, Einstein was not a Christian. He found a personal God belief to be childish and foolish. He was actually skeptical or agnostic to the possibility of something else, a pantheistic, but he
have
wasn't
to
even
study
sure
it
about
that way.
that, so he was not a believer.
Spencerian, I think is the best word here.
But I'm just saying, he certainly was not a believer, and he definitely rejected Christianity, Judaism, any Abrahamic faith. He found it to be childish.
If you,
You-
well, if
Using
you
that
Google-
one quote to
Well,
imply that.
I
inside
changed because I looked at something
God
else
was-
that's
yeah.
not the code.
It is at best quote mining and at worst.
That's correct.
So,
If
I
anyone
have
here-
words that we should-
I have one
if anyone
question.
here
I would
looks
agree
up
with you, yes.
atheistic
He was, he
or,
believed in
atheistic
some
quotes
kind of
for
force,
Einstein,
but he wasn't really.
Yeah.
It's
So
Spinoza.
I have a
What
question.
they call Spinoza's
So,
God. It's-
original sin
Of course,
we use
right.
God
A
for
deist God.
is supposedly why everything gets corrupted, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, but original sin is someone eating the fruit. But my question would be, it's God's flaw. Because if, say Adam and Eve didn't eat the fruit, someone else would. Let's say 1,000 years, it still would be eaten. It only takes one person to condemn all of humanity. That's God's flaw, not man's flaw. Because God is making it, putting man behind the 8 ball. It doesn't matter when. It's not Adam. Who cares? It could have been 10,000 years from now, Adam. Somebody will eat the fruit and then condemn everybody. That is the most immoral thing for me about, in general, original sin. It sets up the entire thing as a fail. There is no way to win. None.
Well,
It's only a
considering
matter
that-
of time.
Considering that God knew exactly what they were gonna do. in
But
the
even
first
if he
place.
didn't, I mean, I'm just saying, it's just a matter of time.
No,
It is a failure.
Omniscient God all of a sudden was taken by surprise. Oh, they ate the fruit. I didn't see it coming, you know. And then he repents for having made
Well, I
man.
think that
Well,
we haven't touched on free will yet.
I guess
We're
in
gonna
the-
have a debate later on.
in-
Uh, Actually,
part of the
coming back to
debate-
that subject was one of the
Okay,
later
go ahead.
ones. That is going to be one of the later topics. We'll get to that.
So do you have a good
I
answer
have
for
a
mine?
question for you.
Yeah.
So, you showed us several slides with a lot of empirical claims that atheists make that, I think you fairly stated a large number of them that I think we all sort of agree with. Your rebuttal to all of them was entirely 100% quotes from a book that we all take to be fiction at best. Do you have any non-quotes of the Bible which rebut any of those arguments from atheists that you put up on the screen?
Yeah, I have a whole paper over there on, of examples that are not taken from Scripture. In other words, it's,
Could-
yeah,
Let's
just,
I would love to hear
Let's take an example of the main item that you did tell me that you know that prayer is answered because you got your returned computer.
Yeah, some
Your
skeptic
computer was
returned his
returned.
computer.
Come on, Dave. Come on, Dave. You gotta give us a little bit more meat than that. Where's the meat, you know? Is everybody here old enough for that? Where's the meat?
Where's the
Yeah, I was,
You're so old you can't.
And then your co-debater said that her cold got healed within a day, and that was her reasoning. I think that personal experiences kind of have to go beyond a cold or a computer, like,
Something that can be empirically tested, if you can show that it's.
that's right. But no matter what you think God is doing, you can't know that if it's God, it could be another God. It could be Satan. It could be just coincidence that your body's going to heal
Thor
itself.
heals all colds.
I mean, if you take a look at all the cultures of the world, all of them get healed equally. And to me, that's the biggest thing. We can't remain in our U.S. bubble and say the U.S., we have to look at all the other cultures of the world that have an equal commitment to their gods and find out, does their prayer not heal as much, considering the same health care? If it's bad health care, of course, you have to discount that. But if their health care is the same, they live the same as we do. They have the same cancer success rates as we do. I mean, it's counting the hits, discounting the misses. That's what I think it is.
Does Dave have the quotes now?
yeah, I've got about 17 pages of answers to prayers that people have asked, and their prayer was so
But
obvious that it
that's-
was.
I'm not talking
personal
about
experience.
prayers, I'm talking about, so you listed the atheist arguments, you didn't rebut a single one of them at all, you basically just quoted the Bible, which, I mean, all the atheists here can basically say the Bible is just a book, it's just words on the page, it The fact that somebody wrote that
Or some-
Nehemiah said that God, you know, gave
Yeah.
him a cow, doesn't mean that it actually happened.
You know, it's a funny
You know.
thing you mentioned Nehemiah, because there is a salient verse in this case, and that's chapter 4, verse 9.
I've read a book about a man who saves the innocent, he hunts down evil, and he wears a black cape, and he dresses like a bat. That doesn't mean that I believe
You know,
that
would
Batman is real.
would it be of any interest if I tell you what the sentence is
2
before
minutes to
making a
go.
judgment on it first?
Dave, why don't you bring up the next?
My point is that the book is irrelevant. The book is,
Not so
It's
fast,
just words.
not so fast,
you have to prove the book
Not
is
so
real
f-
before you can claim it as proof of anything.
not so fast.
Not so fast.
Not so
Okay, just
fast.
let him finish his.
Thank you.
He doesn't let anybody finish, does he?
Nehemiah 4:9 roughly translated is, "So we prayed to our God and set a guard on the wall," from which we derive the expression, "Pray as though you've never worked and work as though you've never prayed," meaning there's no way we can know where the answer, if it is going to come from, is going to come. And there's also the matter of everything else equal. We can't assess what everything else equal is going to be. We don't have the knowledge of what everybody is like. It is difficult to attribute specific things. The best we can say is that everything else equal, thus and so, or thus and so is not the case. In fact, somebody has pointed out, I think, that either God does answer a prayer directly.
So how is that
Or-
quote relevant to what I was saying before?
I'm trying to answer your question. Either God does answer a prayer directly, or he says no, or he says wait. That's about it.
Right.
Can I
So
respond to that?
the
Can I
question
respond
is,
to that?
if you keep saying is, there, if we could study, but the point is we have. In 1872 was the Galton study, prayer failed. In 1988, the Byrd-Harris study, prayer failed. In 1997, the O'Leary, prayer failed. Sinclair in 1998, prayer failed. The Mayo Clinic 2001, double blind, prayer failed. The IVF ET prayer scandal 2001 showed prayer failed. In 2001, there was another study to try to go against and figure out the problems with the other one. Prayer failed.
You have to get to the Templeton study, that's coming up, right?
In 2005, well, I want to say, it's not like there's one study. It's
Right,
a
but the
failure.
The
Templeton
Templeton study is the
Yes.
one where the people
But
that
it's
were
a
prayed for
Christian-
cleared
I know,
better.
A
so-
lot of
so
these are Christian groups.
The
that want to
Marantha
prove
study in 2005, prayer failed. The STEP project for Harvard, prayer failed. Hold on.
Now, okay,
So-
you gotta wrap it up here.
Anyway, whatever. But anyways, what I'm saying is, you keep saying that if we could study, we have studied, it failed. It failed every time. How many times do you have to empirically study and nothing, and still believe that it's totally true?
John, you have a question.
Well, I think somebody brought this up, I'm just remembering it.
Can you move forward a little bit, John, so we
The
can?
difficulty with doing a scientific study of prayer is that you cannot control who is praying. Because people outside the study may also be praying.
Well, wouldn't that be more powerful prayer then? And wouldn't that go against the prayer study if there's more people praying? I don't see your point there.
Except that your control group has people praying that the experimenters don't know about.
The trouble I see with any prayer study is that prayer is based on faith, and faith is not an empirically, scientifically,
That's true. But there is one thing I'd like to say about the Templeton study, and that is that there were three groups, a neutral group, a control group. There was also, how many people have heard about the Templeton study? Only atheists. Interesting. The control group, sorry, I don't mean to put anybody down, that's just what it is. The prayer, control group, a group that was, they were doing the actual test on, I'm just gonna count the three for now, the fourth one was some people consider irrelevant. And the third group, they actually let people know that the prayer study was going on. So that group was not double blind, and then they actually did the results. And this was 16,000 heart patients across the US. What group do you think did the worst? The control group, the group being prayed but didn't know about it, or the people that were being prayed for and they told them about it? Does anybody, I know that the atheists know about it, but how about the Christians? Do you have any idea which one went down as the worst performing?
Well, from what you're leading to, you're probably going to say the Christians did the worst.
People who knew they were being prayed for.
Yes, people who knew, and they
Oh,
came
I
up
see.
with a new axiom called prayer stress, because oh, people are praying for me, I better get well, I better get well, and they started being more stressful and they actually did worse. But just think about those heart patients. A couple of Christians have come up to me and said, God is not to be tested. You can't test God with a study. Okay, let's take all those people that were going to get healed better because they were being prayed for. And God said, I'm sorry guys, you know, even though all these people are praying for you, and I would really give you, you know, a good heart, and you would walk out of the hospital, but because of this prayer study, I'm not going to do that. So if you kind of look at it as an ironic twist of fate, God is actually proving himself to be a little malevolent there, because he's telling these people, I was going to heal you, but I'm not going to heal you now because of this study, and I don't want to show myself. So if you kind of look at it that way, some people, if you think that God actually did not heal them, even though they were going to be healed before the study, God kind of tricked them. Yes, got a question?
I have a question. Do you think that someone who's not a Christian would become a Christian because they were convinced through a prayer study?
Repeat.
Absolutely. There's some very gullible people out there that would,
Yeah, I mean, I've
and
seen
it's
the
human
legit-
nature to do, by the way. It's not anything to
No,
do
what
with.
she's saying is if the prayer study showed that the people praying were healed, that if non-Christians would believe, yes, I think it would.
Yes,
You
that
think
would be
evidence
evidence.
would show-
That would be evidence, yes.
So you think it wouldn't be that they believed in Jesus, it would be the prayer study that's converting
Well,
them?
to be truly honest, I would like to have 8 different prayer studies minimum of all the different religions, and then prove that Allah was better than the Christian God, or that the Raelians, have you heard of Raelians, by the way? Really cool religion, you know, that the Raelians would.
My own
Can
is
I
what they are,
interject
yes.
here? I think essentially what you're asking is, as an atheist, is there anything that would convince me to become a Christian? And I would say yes. He'll show me somebody being prayed to have their amputated arm grown back. It grows back the next day.
Well, I go a
I'm
little less than
gonna
that,
be at
but
church with my wallet, and I'm gonna be,
So that would make you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior?
if you show me a clear, verified miracle, absolutely.
but it would have to be of a Christian. And plus, you know, that wouldn't do it for me either, because what if Allah stepped in and said, you know, this guy's really been good, I'm gonna heal him, even though everybody's praying for him, that's a Christian. So you never know, you don't know which God is being healed, and it could be Satan pulling your leg too, you know?
Well, I understand that, I understand that you're looking for evidence, but I'm saying, the point where, I mean, if a Christian is sharing their faith about what they believe in, that they know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, I honestly don't believe that a prayer study is going to change, like what you're saying, you wanna see evidence of a miracle. But then, you know, someone can come back and say, well, prove to me that that was Jesus who did the miracle. You
But-
know, so
so-
you're gonna
Yes.
go back
So
to the
we-
same thing.
Yeah, that's
Where's
true,
the
and
purpose of
that's
the
because
So,
it's a valid.
the other way
it's a-
around, is
it's
there
a-
anything that we could prove to you that you would believe that Jesus is false? Because see, you're putting it that everyone has to believe Jesus is true.
See, so,
I mean,
that's the difference in our positions, though, is that we've all got there's a standard at which every single person, okay, I shouldn't speak for the other atheists.
Most.
There's a standard for most atheists, that if you provided a certain level of evidence, we would convert to Christianity, or Buddhism, or Islam, or Jainism, whatever your religion happens to be. If you provided a certain level of proof, we would convert.
It's the same level as
But if
right
you're
to.
approaching the conversation from, well, there's nothing that I could ever say that would change
Yeah.
your mind,
Well, I mean, the original.
then, I mean, that's not a value judgment, it's just a,
No, I'm just questioning what the prayer study, you were talking about the prayer studies, that there's, you know, all these prayer studies that were false, that they show that God
And a
doesn't
lot of
answer
them were
prayer.
done by Christian groups too, so.
the Templeton studies, Templeton Foundation's a
Yes.
Christian
Debbie?
foundation.
Okay, before you ask your question, I just want to make a point. Everybody here who's not a non-believer, who started out as a believer, please raise your hand.
Everybody but
Over
me.
50 years.
Okay, so that's everybody
him.
in this room who's an atheist,
John.
who used to be a
Except
believer.
for him, he said.
No,
Except
well,
for
John,
one.
yeah, John for me. Well, I grew up in a fairly secular household, but I had what I call, most evolutionary biologists would disagree with what I'm about to say. I had the curiosity gene, and I see it among people 8 to 13 years old. They just are curious about the real truth and they decide for themselves at a very early age, totally not indoctrinated by atheists, on their own, decide this stuff is a little kooky. It happens in all religions, happens in all countries, and I think that some people just have a curious mindset, predetermined, that they're going to start asking questions as be skeptical at a very early age. That was me, and I'm sure that there was a lot of people. Yes, sir?
I was just wondering if you don't believe in creationism, how do you explain your own existence or other forms of life, how it came to be? Like, if you believe in evolution or the Big Bang Theory, it's like, when's the last time you saw something live come out of a bomb exploding or something, It's like,
Well, evolution
bombs
doesn't work
kill
that way.
things, they don't bring things to life.
The reason I have,
There's three different important things that you
I thought he was asking me.
There's evolution, abiogenesis, which is the origin of life, and the Big Bang, right, which is what we consider the origin of the universe. They're three entirely separate things that you're sort of like stringing all together. So you kind of have to separate them
Well,
out.
I guess that's my
If you want to
understanding
understand them, you have to try to separate them out,
Your
because
alternative
evolution
to
is.
believing in God and creationism, those are the three things that I know about that you can use as an alternative to believing in a creator.
Well, so if you're talking about creationism, right, so God created the universe versus the Big Bang, that's sort of one thing. Right? God, whether life exists.
You have a raised hand behind you.
I want to answer
Oh,
that
sorry.
question from a different perspective. Okay, so one of the problems that I have with the argument about God creating things is that here you have a being that is greater than anything that we know in this
Well,
universe.
I-
Where did he come from?
I'll bring it back in 2 minutes.
And
He's
it's
always been.
it's a circular argument.
Then why bother
If God
positing
can
that?
have
Why what?
been here all the time, so could our matter in our universe. So the same argument that you use about God, we can use about our universe.
Wouldn't it all collapse on itself? It's been here for all time.
No.
It might, maybe it.
Of those
not
three things that he was
collapse
talking
several
about,
times.
evolution is most well-founded and has the most
But
evidence.
come here
When you ask any
and find
atheist
out
about
what
the Big
evidence
Bang,
you guys have
most
for
of them will say, we don't know, but we might find
Your
out.
argument
And
is
about
yes.
abiogenesis, same thing, we don't know, and
I don't
we're
have
very
that.
comfortable about not knowing,
There's
something
a
that a lot of
very good
people
book, very
have,
accessible
it's
to
a fallacy
people
when you get an answer from creationists. That sounds logical, and if I was a neutral party without any knowledge base, I'd probably say exactly the same thing. That sounds really good, that's how it happened, until you start looking at the other side. And all of us are truth seekers, so if you're a truth seeker and you haven't read an evolution book, you have to read an evolution book to be intellectually honest with yourself, to say, I've studied the Bible, I gotta study this other book to find out what the opposite viewpoint
If you
is.
read that.
I think that's intellectually very,
Bruce, there's
Honest.
more than one people talking at the same time.
okay, I'm sorry. We're gonna go back to David.
Okay, let me say one thing about this prayer. There's another thing that God will,
Say something about prayer?
yeah, you can go ahead, but just the fact, another thing that God will answer
Okay.
is if somebody
Okay.
asks Jesus to become their personal Lord and Savior, He will answer that. He that calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. So you have that promise from God as well. You've got a promise that He will give you wisdom. You've got a promise that He will save you if you ask Him to. So, I mean, there are certain promises that God has given already that He's going to answer yes to. You had a question or comment?
In that debate, I read 10 promises of Jesus that prayer would be answered.
Right.
Paul could not get his prayer for the thorn flesh answered. King David had a very important prayer he could not get answered. You found your computer, that was an answer to prayer. However, the real benchmark is the amputees, and as far as I'm concerned, Christians are just staying clear of that. It doesn't matter whether Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, any of the popes, Billy Graham, Mother Teresa, any of you Christians in here
The imams in Saudi
can
Arabia.
pray for an amputee, and it won't happen. It just won't happen, and that is a benchmark. So that's something you can prove.
We're gonna go on to the, yes, you had a question?
I'm just listening to you guys. I heard a gentleman say, pray for an amputee. Seems like we should be
We
Christian
do see
standpoint.
things still.
Well, hold on a second. How about you do your own prayers and see what happens in your own life? And just a thought, because that would be my challenge. I'm not gonna look at, I don't care what happened to study, I don't care what this man is saying, what that person's saying. If there's something to prayer, if I wanna find out firsthand, I think do your own prayers and do them silently, whoever you choose
I have
to
a
pray to.
response for that.
That's what I've said, do your own prayers. This is a challenge for everybody in the room.
I have a
And
response
see
for
what
that.
happens.
Would you like to hear it?
But hold on a second, just know that it's not a genie in a bottle prayer though. 'Cause sometimes
No, realistic prayer, I
are-
understand.
you know, they sit there
Okay,
with a
do
genie
you
in a
think
bottle.
that I would be
like-
impressed with
Sometimes
a
God
prayer
is
that would
just-
happen to me versus a study with 16,000 people? I think that a study with 16,000 people is much more valid than a personal experience. Plus, I don't know if that prayer might have happened without my prayer. The prayer would have been answered naturally without my prayer.
So make prayer to God, let me know if you are real. And then
Oh,
you'll
how
know.
many times have I done it?
Okay.
How many times have other atheists done it?
And I
Okay,
I
go ahead.
I guarantee you, all of us that started out in religion and
Well,
became
do it
atheists
again.
had that prayer many times, trust me.
It only can go so far, man.
So I would say that probably you could say that the reason why America doesn't have enough Christians, but in the Congo, in some parts of Africa, it's up to 97% Christian. And yet, children die every day of just the simplest, basic things. To say that there's a God, to me, is abhorrent. If there's a God, he only cares about and takes care of the ones who already have means. That is, to me, disgusting. Because you should be taking care of the ones that don't have means. The fact that they, especially with the higher amount of faith. In fact, I watched a video in the Congo where this person ate grass because their pastor told them to. You can't get faith like that in the United States. And yet, no children are different being
I
saved.
might say something about the Congo. Basically, when there was a lot of pressure put on these European countries to give up their colonies in Africa, and of course this was when Nikita Khrushchev, basically the Russia came in and they colonized, they took over. They had a man in the north part of the Congo. Katanga was actually a Christian province, was thriving. They were doing great. People, there were not starving kids in Katanga. But then all of a sudden, the Marxists, the atheists came in and destroyed that system. Now the kids are starving. So it's the atheists that are causing the people to starve.
One particular country.
Marxism and atheism are not the same thing. Marxism is an economic policy.
Bruce?
Anyway.
I'm probably over, but I haven't spoken yet, and I think I have at least some say. One of the things that didn't get mentioned yet, that would need a lot more discussion, is whatever is the purpose of prayer in the first place. That is, to what end is prayer supposed to be? Is it supposed to change us in our behavior? Like, for example, you were mentioning about the Congo and so forth. Well, whatever the dire circumstances are, many times we are the ones who need to be changed by the prayers that we make. In fact, there was one guy at the beach who asked me, how come you don't pick up the litter at the beach instead of preach? It took me 3.5 years to figure it out. The first thing is, we should still preach because it's God's world, and if we took better care of it, we wouldn't have so much trash on the beach. So prayer is meant for a number of different things that were never mentioned here. It's more meant to change us than it is to try to get empirical results, which, by the way, on my own slide of my own talk, I said is beyond the ken of empiricism. It doesn't belong there in the first place.
Well, I partly agree with you. One point taken on the omnisciency point is that why pray if God already has designed your life from the beginning of the universe? To me, if you
Because he
believe in-
commanded it.
He commanded
Well-
to pray.
Mhm,
Even
that's
though,
why.
even though he can't change things because
No, we
he's,
just said.
No, we're not Calvinists here.
okay.
And,
Oh, well, because they're the wrong kind of Christian.
well, no, the
We
determinists.
are moving on to the next topic. Is
We could-
everybody enjoying themselves so far?
Anyway, I knew that was a can of worms, but I said I'm going to do it anyway.
Alcohol drinkers, please join us at the bar afterwards.
Okay, let's.
The Royal Scotsman is the
We're
best.
resetting our clocks, right, Dave?
Yeah, this is a very long one, but I'm going to try to
You got 10 minutes.
sneak through it here.
That's our.
Is there a more rational? This is one we had a debate. We never really dealt with the subject that well, but is there a more rational belief than what is found in the Bible? Because I had so many atheists say, we're not saying that there's not a God up there necessarily, we're just saying it's not the Christian God. So then that's That may not be all of you, but I've heard that statement several times. So I said, well, okay, let's look at what we've got. Now, if God has created the universe and you have an adequate cause to produce the effect, the atheist, as far as I can tell, doesn't have an adequate cause to produce the effect. You know, nothingness can't create all the everything in the universe. So anyway, well, God is self-existent, but anyway, so the idea is, well, okay, if God exists, then obviously he's going to want us to know what he requires of us. He's going to, you know, if he created us, and if there is a God, because we can't explain things without a God, then who is he and where has he revealed himself? So let's look at the gamut of literature available to us as humans and find if there is any other choice, alternative choice, outside of Christianity. And so that was the question for debate number 5. Has God revealed himself in any writings? And so I started with basically Hinduism. I spent some time over in India studying Hinduism. And just to look at what Hinduism teaches, well, it's Advaita Vedanta Hinduism. Huh?
Can't see it.
Oh, is it? Okay, sorry
Black
about that.
and purple.
Black and purple, Dave. What is this? Sometimes
Well, it's clear on this screen, you know, it's hard to see. I should have changed it, but okay. What we have in Hinduism today is it's gone from dualism to non-dualism, which means it's Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, which is nothing more than monism, and that's what the belief that has survived today in America and almost anywhere in the world. This is the Vedanta school, which is basically what we have. The school teaches that there is only one impersonal God called Brahman. In other words, it's a form of pantheism. God is in everything. So Brahman alone is real and everything else is an illusion. What I'm going to show is that this is also that permeates almost all other religions. Brahman emerged, the universe is part of itself, covered with Maya or illusion. God gives away, you know, a form of nihilism is exactly what Hindu gurus teach in America today. So Charles Manson said, if God is one, what is bad? Hinduism teaches that God is one. The ultimate reality is it's one impersonal, undifferentiated divine source, essence. That's
Hinduism is not a religion. The word Hinduism means to love India. It comes from the British occupation. There actually is a lot of different religions and to believe a lot of different gods. There is no one uniformed in India.
Let me
Save it for the discussion.
Yeah. Hinduism is
all
a
the religions of India.
Correct.
Save it for
Exactly.
the discussion, please.
Hinduism is a religion, but Buddhism is sometimes not a religion because they have no God to worship, whereas Hinduism is sort of a pantheistic worldview. So is Buddhism, really. So this is what that teaches. This is Hindu morality. Our concepts of sin and virtue alien us from our true self. That which you see as impure is pure. That which you imagine ideas of sin and virtue are simply through ignorance. Swami Satchidananda, if you are possessed by that higher self, nothing is bad. Paramahamsa Yogananda, God sees your good and evil thoughts, but his actions don't really matter to him. Obedience to God is the greatest sin, according to Rajneesh. I don't believe in morality, I believe in destroying it. I don't believe in consciousness, I believe in consciousness, not conscience. So what does Hindu theology teach about God? He's an impersonal divine essence. There's nothing that is not God. He can neither be known or worshipped. We're informed that Brahman does not know anything. He's impersonal, omnipresent being who cannot be called a knowing being. He cannot be called a thinking being because that's the process of the weak only. He cannot be called a reasoning being because the reason is a sign of weakness. He cannot be called a creative being because none creates except bondage. He cannot show love or mercy because love and mercy are personal attributes. So he's non-personal. That makes us higher than God. Hinduism in America teach that man is outwardly an illusion. So, I mean, I'm just summarizing it here.
Do that pretty quick, Dave.
Yeah, so
5 minutes.
you are the God of this universe. I was talking to a friend of mine who said, you know, I was a member of EST, Erhard Seminars Training. Erhard Seminars Training is teaching Advaita Vedanta Hinduism. He walks up and says, I am God. I created my own universe, basically. This is the alternative.
The alternative to what?
This is an alternative to Christianity. The practice of yoga and meditation are simply a way of getting into an altered state of consciousness to realize your own godhood. So it's in essence, Rajneesh teaches that Jesus is a mental case. He's a fanatic. He carries the same kind of, this is the kind of teaching that goes along with Hinduism. Vivekananda, it says that Christ is, for us Christians, this was blasphemy, but basically that's what they believe about Jesus. The goal of Hindu salvation is an enlightenment which denies the existence of the world and causes a person to realize his or her own godhood. But if one is already God, then to seek God outside of oneself is foolish, spiritually destructive. And of course, this is the lie of Satan that he gave to Eve, thou shalt be as God. And we see basically that's what happens when you eliminate God, you become God. And the greatest deception is devotion to God, according to Rajneesh. What do they believe about the place of the guru? Well, he becomes somebody to worship. They believe that mind is spiritual poison, so that's why you get into an altered state of consciousness. And getting into an altered state of consciousness is actually stepping down from the control of your thoughts and allowing some other spirit to come in, and that's could be possession. So they want to destroy the mind. The world never existed. It was a dream. You don't take life seriously at all. Mere mind and mere body do not exist according to Hindu teachings. So their teachings are summarized by discard the mind and independent thinking, demand an absolute unquestioning obedience, reject moral standards, demean and cheapen human life as an illusion, see family as a perversion or concession to evil, reject Christianity as a spiritual hazard or abomination, and of course, offer a cult path that may lead to insanity. So then we go to Buddhism.
We just agree that all of this is all nonsense?
Well,
Because you think this is all nonsense, right?
yeah, but I'm just showing, okay, I just want to
It's
get...
all nonsense too.
How nonsensical does it get? Not whether it is.
But-
No, but like I was trying to say,
2.5
to
minutes.
say that Hinduism is that one teacher, that is an absolute fallacy.
Let's save it for discussion. Dave, you might want to continue.
They have the goddess Kali. They also
Guys,
the elephant.
Misrepresenting Hinduism is sort of beside
Please.
the point, though, right?
Boss, please. Dave has the time. You can spend it the way he likes.
Thanks. Now, I just want to mention, just to kind of compare Buddhism and Christianity. In Christianity, Jesus came that people might have life and have it more abundantly. In Buddhism, Buddha came that people might rid themselves of personal existence. That was his solution. Christianity, the world is a loving creation of God. In Buddhism, it's only a temporary illusion of a deluded mind. In Christianity, God will either glorify or punish the spirit of man. In Buddhism, no spirit exists to be glorified or punished. In Christianity, absolute morality is central theme. In Buddhism, absolute morality is non-existent. Christianity is essentially theistic, stressing God's self-revelation and gracious initiative on man's behalf. Buddhism is self-material. You have to earn your own salvation. In Buddhism, they're the very means to escape suffering. In fact, true biblical faith in Christ is to rejected in favor of self-salvation, which can only result in eternal suffering. Buddha teaches reincarnation but denies the soul. So what can possibly reincarnate? Spiritually enlightened bodhisattvas vow to work for enlightenment of all beings, fully knowing no beings ever existed in the first place. So how can one grant wisdom to those who have compassion on non-entities? Why should enlightened beings toy with illusion? Why help save a thing which, according to Buddhist philosophy, must save itself? But it doesn't really matter, for nothing is saved and no soul exists to be enlightened. What then of the Buddha and his mission? Does it have relevance? And what of Buddhism? What's the point to all its efforts? The truth is, given Buddhist assumptions, it makes no difference whether Buddha, bodhisattvas, or Buddhism ever existed. It can bring no fundamental change to the world. Since the goal of Buddhism is to destroy the individual person who's merely an illusion, everything precious to that individual is also denied or destroyed. As one Buddhist convert to Christianity says, I didn't want nirvana, I wanted eternal life. So far from accomplishing its goal to end suffering, Buddhism has no real solution to suffering. So why was the man old? Why did the man die? When Buddha sought an answer to the whys, he concluded falsely that personal existence itself was the cause of all suffering, and therefore the goal must be to annihilate personal existence. But people don't want to be annihilated. They want to live forever, what Christianity offers.
Right.
So I wanted to discuss Islam, and just, to understand what Islam teaches, just give me another couple minutes. And I will.
Okay, 2 minutes.
We debate Muslims in various parts of the country, and I was over in England We debated 7 Muslims, David Wood and I and several others. But one of the things that came up was Shabir Ali told me we lost all 7 debates. He's a Muslim. He said the Muslims lost all 7 debates. Because what did Muhammad teach? Well, Muhammad taught there were 7 earths flat like a carpet separated by 500 years, sitting on top of this large fish called a noon, which is on top of a bowl, which is on top of a cube, which is on top of dust, and only Allah knows what's under the dust. And so above the 7th earth are 8 giant goats with 500 years between their front hooves and their back hooves. So, and we look at this here. I'm quoting here. But he sees, this is the only evidence for Islam being true, or that Muhammad is a messenger from Allah, is the scientific reliability of the Quran, because Muhammad did no miracles. So the only miracle they could come up with was the Quran itself. Well, what does the Quran teach? And I say, well, the Quran teaches that God created the stars. They were as missiles to hit the devils to keep them out of heaven. The sun sets in a murky pool surrounded by a bunch of people. And so the assessment, this is Muslims point to Muhammad's miraculous, accurate scientific statements as proof Islam is true, but what exactly did Muhammad get right? Muhammad believed there's 7 earths, false, all of them flat, false, stacked on top of each other like pancakes, false, except a long distance between them, false. Out of the edge of the top earth is a pool, false, where the sun sets is false. There are also 7 heavens above the earth, false, all like domes that will fall on us if God doesn't hold them up, false. The lowest heaven, in the lowest heaven are the stars which God uses to hurl at demons. All of this is sandwiched between a giant fish and 8 giant goats. And then, of course, we look at human reproduction. Everything he said about human reproduction was wrong. And then we go through the idea of personal hygiene. Everything he said about her personal hygiene was also wrong. So we got 1.7 billion people following the hallucinations of one man, and the only evidence that we have is the scientific reliability of the Quran. So I'm done.
Oh, okay.
I've got a question for you. So based off of what you just showed us about Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam,
I was just trying to hit the main ones.
I'm going to assume, yeah, hitting the main points, I'm going to assume that you think Hinduism is not true.
Correct.
You believe that Buddhism is not true.
Correct.
You believe that Islam is not true.
Correct.
I'm going to further extend that and say you believe that Norse mythology, Thor, the god Thor, that's not true.
Right.
You believe that Greek mythology is not true.
Right.
Roman mythology is not true, right? Apollo doesn't chase the sun across the sky every day.
Yep.
So in at least
And you'd
5
agree with
instances,
me, right?
you are an atheist in at least 5 instances.
Right.
With regards to Buddhism, Islam,
Well, I don't
Hinduism,
believe that those
the
are
Roman
true.
mythology, Norse mythology, Greek mythology, you are essentially an atheist with regards to those beliefs.
Well, I wouldn't call myself an atheist. I would say I believe those are false teachings.
You don't believe that they.
Yeah, those are false gods.
Okay.
Right.
And
It's
then
not the true
and
God.
And for all the other religions outside of Christianity, you essentially you believe that they don't exist.
Well, all I'm saying is that I spent 20 years studying these different religions. I was on staff at Purdue.
Thousands and thousands of different religions.
And what I
Exist
found
in-
was that, I mean,
since
just
humanity
out of
evolved.
curiosity, I tried to do this to help people, to say, okay, look, I want to understand where you're coming from.
But you are essentially an atheist with regards to the thousands and thousands of religions except for Christianity.
That's a crummy word to use.
I don't know that I would call
Not a
myself an
he's a
atheist.
non-believer in those.
I would not believe
Okay,
that.
so you're a non-believer in the thousands of religions outside of Christianity.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. So obviously, the argument from our point of view is we are also exactly like you, except we also don't believe Christianity.
Right.
So we can reduce it to that then.
Actually, I was speaking to
So
about
you're
300
almost there.
Muslims
One
one
more
time.
step. You're almost there. That's why we're here.
No, you're almost there, by one step.
Yeah, I guess he's right. You could go either way.
Okay,
No, one or 5,000 steps. You've got to decide. It's only one
here's
step in one direction.
here's a Taliban singles online Islamic dating service.
Does that help the female suicide bombers get mates?
Oh, that's the next thing.
I'm not sure that sort of
a booby
slide
bomb
helps
with
your
a
case.
heavy-set woman that has a bomb in her boobs to go on the airplanes because they can't detect that within the X-rays. They only detect metal. Don't give them any ideas.
Do you
No
have
booby
pictures
traps.
of fundamentalist Mormons and
I'm just
the,
timing
the,
myself
the
here.
stuff they make their wives wear too, or we just?
Yeah, I
or we
spent
just
time
take
in,
racist pictures of people who are not Americans?
What struck me is that there are billions of people that believe in Hinduism.
Yeah, well,
And there's billions, actually, Christianity is really number 3, if, or 2, if you count Christianity and Catholicism as 2 different religions.
speaking of Mormonism, that was my next subject.
Oh, I know you hate Mormonism. And
I
they're
lived
the
in
only
Salt Lake.
They're the only growing religion in the world. All the other religions are actually losing steam. Mormonism, the only reason they're growing is because they count international converts as well.
Right,
But
the
did
jig
you
is
know
up
that
here in America.
38% of people in America have changed their religion. I don't know if it's from one sect to another. I think that's a little high when I read that statistic, and I don't know the specifics of the questionnaire either.
I
But
think
there's a
they're-
lot
I
of
think
people
they're
changing
counting-
religions.
They're counting people who decide to stop going to the Baptist
Yeah,
church
well, maybe.
4 blocks away, decide to go to the
I don't
Presbyterian
know, I'd have
church
to actually
2
look at
blocks
the
away.
question. The
So-
statistics can be skewed. Yes,
I
ma'am.
was gonna make a comment about Hinduism. I'm Indian and I was Hindu.
You were Hindu.
I was, but that was because that was the only thing we knew. That was our culture. And I became a Christian later. So, India has like more than 1 billion people. Hinduism is a national religion. It's also a cultural religion. That's just what you know because that's the culture you're born into. I don't know that it's really a choice, until you are really.
I agree with you. in
That's
that
all
would-
religion, it's not a choice.
We're all
kids are-
geographically
are-
disposed to believe in the religion that we are born into.
No, I think she's trying to make another point here.
Well, I'm saying that if you do have the choice, if you're searching or you're questioning, I became a Christian after, that process took place.
May I ask you how many other religions that you explored before you landed on Christianity?
Well, I didn't, it wasn't like a search for another religion. I was coming from a Hindu background and I got exposed to Christianity and I did actually believe I believed that it was the truth. That Jesus really is God, but what I was saying is that what I grew up with that was just my culture, so I didn't really know anything different. I think it's the same case with people born into Islam, Muslim
Of course,
religion.
geographical,
It's the same thing, is
yes.
that's the country they're born into, or that's the culture they're born into.
I think that indoctrination happens all over the world, and I don't think that we should teach our children any religion until they're adult, and then have them explore many different religions, or at the same time, like secular people do, they have their child go to a mosque and a synagogue and a church and other religions as well, and let them decide. That, to me, is the coolest parent of all, not the parent that selfishly says, I want to see my child in the afterlife, and if they believe in the supernatural. But I wanted to ask a couple questions about the Christians here. I think that it's would be very revealing. How many people here are young earthnists, meaning that they only believe that the earth is 6,000 years old?
Or thereabouts.
Or thereabouts, so 3, okay. So the rest of you are probably what I would consider old earth creationists, meaning that the earth is really old and God still had a part to do with it. Would I be correct in assuming that?
What, you're talking about the earth or man?
Earth right now, is the earth 6,000 years
Oh,
old,
you're
like in a
saying
literal,
because
if you're a
man-
literalist or a young earth creationist like Dave?
But I don't know if I agree with you that the Bible says the earth is only, I think they calculated that man was 6,000 years old.
Well,
Yeah, that's what I.
the universe is 10,000. I don't know about the earth. I was told by young earth creationists that the earth is 6,000 years old. Is that about right?
Yeah, the universe itself,
Yeah,
the sun and the moon,
Well-
the stars were created on the 4th day.
that's
Yeah,
right.
And we
Fourth
should
day,
let
6,000 years
the
ago.
Christians,
The
if they wanna
fourth
separate
24-hour
themselves into
day.
different groups, we should what
Yeah.
their, what their different beliefs are.
And I think the reason for that, just to let me explain,
I'm just curious to find out where you're coming from. I'm not trying to separate you at all. It's interesting to know that, though. There's a whole lot. Robert's
Just,
an earth creationist, by the way.
just let me finish my sentence on that because somebody brought it up, and this was one of the things that came up during one of the debates. And the idea was, why did God create the sun and the moon and the stars on the 4th day? I mean, obviously you'd expect him to create it at the beginning, but I believe the reason for that was that he was showing the preeminence of the earth. You know, God created the earth to be inhabited, and the sun and moon and stars were to light the day and the night, and for signs and for seasons. And so it was like, create the earth, because every pagan culture believed that, you know, they worshiped the sun many times. That was part of it. They kind of see the earth as spawning from the sun, and I believe that God was showing basically that this is the earth. This is what he focused on, and everything else is just a servant to the earth, to light the night, for lights, for signs and for seasons. I believe that's why he did it. And so God being light himself, you know, he doesn't need the light generator to create to create the light source.
Yeah.
So
Not only that, but in Revelation, the steps of creation are essentially unwound. They go backwards, and in other words, to go back essentially the beginning, except it's restored. And there it's found that there's no need for a sun then either.
mm-hmm.
So this amplifies the
beyond
point.
You're positing way too many
Yeah,
things for us to
that's
keep
right.
track of what's going on.
Here's the
But
thing,
has
Dave.
science said that the sun is actually older than the earth?
Is the science older than the earth?
No, science says that the sun is older. I think it's like 56 billion years old or something like that. It's older than the earth is.
No.
It couldn't be that old because the sun would not be there.
The sun's
I
only
think
like
you're-
5.5 billion years old. The Earth's about 4.5 billion years
That's
old.
right.
Nobody would have
the
said
sun's
anything beyond
halfway in its-
13.7 anyway, yeah.
About halfway in its life.
But I mean, it's sort of a moot point.
Well, the idea
But I'm
here
just saying,
that
they're
we-
saying that the earth is first, sun is second. I'm saying science says that the earth is
Of
second.
course.
Well, we're in form of science.
You're
I've got a
talking
lot of
about
forms that would say the sun is quite young.
Millions
Has to be young.
This whole conversation is mute because no matter what young earth creationist you talk to that's an apologetic, you will get a slightly different answer. And that's why, to me, it's meaningless. It's the same thing as I said before. The spiritualism, for instance, let's take that for an example that could be equated to the young earth creationism, different opinions. You talk to a spiritualist. Oh, you're a spiritualist. What does that mean to you? You'll get
Famous
a
witches,
different
there they are.
answer for every person.
He's
If
on
you
the
get
ball.
a different answer from every person, it's meaningless, except to the person. It's meaningless to everybody else because if you have 100 people and 100 different spiritualisms, it's meaningless. If you have 100 people with 100 different opinions about young earth creationism, it's meaningless. There is no correct answer. Dave has his opinion. Dave has his opinion. You have an opinion about what young earth, and it could be different than Dave's opinion. Slightly different.
Lori Cabot was a friend of
To
mine.
me, if everybody has, let me finish and I'll go right to you. If you have a different opinion of everything, and you say that it's right, especially the interpretation of a holy book, then those interpretations mean that, to me, it's meaningless. Unless it comes down to one particular thing, and I think that salvation, I think, is what you're gonna come down to. What were you about to say,
No,
Dave?
I was gonna say, when you say a difference of opinion on what it means, I don't know why you ask the question, who's younger and who's older.
Because I'm asking apologetics is supposed to know their shit. They're supposed to know their shit. I have 5 close friends that are ministers, and I email them occasionally this very difficult verse, Luke 19:27, very difficult verse for apologetics to answer. And so I ask them this. There's no prelude or explanation afterward. It's kind of its verse
That
all
isn't
on
true.
its own.
That isn't true.
Well, that's an opinion.
No,
So
actually, I
asked-
told you so.
I know, and I asked these very close friends of mine that are ministers and pastors, and all of them said, in fact, one of them was Jim Palin.
It has
Jim Palin.
15 verses that
Well,
precede it. That's the context.
I think we're
They did
veering
not
quite
agree
far
with
away
you.
from.
Let's get back to our topics.
That's the point.
You did have a question, which
I can
was.
talk to him after, just
Yeah,
let him.
talk to me
finish.
afterward about it, yeah,
No,
because,
there's no need to hear.
the point,
Again.
that's my point. When I study this stuff, I say, give me some good explanation. Now, if let's just imagine, I'm gonna get back to you after this 30-second sentence, yes. If all of the ministers in Christianity agreed on one verse and didn't have any different interpretations, that would be pretty cool. It wouldn't give evidence to me, but that would be a really solid thing. We believe that this means this and only this. You will never find it. Never find it. Okay, Dave, your turn.
Okay, I'm going to defer to, we're going to
Are
talk
we
right
gonna-
now for just a second about,
Are we off the clock, kind of?
we
9 o'clock.
we are 9 o'clock, but
9:30 is kind of the.
anybody that has to leave, feel free to leave. We'll try to wrap it up here pretty quick. I'd like to let Dave Menton speak instead of want to show it's coming from more than just one source.
Polite for us to
Dave speaks to the top 1% of medical students in America. He got his PhD at Brown University in cell biology, but his area of expertise, which he's written medical journals, concerns the area of the embryology, life, that sort of thing. But here he's going to be talking about birds and feathers. And I thought we did discuss this in one of the debates. Was the question, did birds come from dinosaurs? Did the scale, in other words, they would all say that the scales turned into feathers. And preceding this, I had a bunch of slides showing that, but I just want to let him speak for just a minute.
They believe absolutely that reptiles evolved into birds, and because they believe that, they necessarily believe that the reptilian scale evolved into the feather. That is believed with something that borders on virtual certainty. And just a few years ago in the distinguished journal Nature, there was an article in which they hired an artist to illustrate. And in evolutionary terms, if you can get an artist to illustrate it, it pretty much means it happened. And they start out with a scale over on the left. It's kind of an elongated scale, and there are reptiles that have a kind of an elongated scale. There's an animal called Longisquama, for example, that has an elongated scale, but it is a scale. It's not a feather by any means. But evolutionists imagine that in the course of evolution, by a completely mindless, purposeless, and goalless process, this scale sort of became frayed, like you see in step 2, and to make all these parts, and of course it's in a sort of a Lamarckian way. The frayed scale was passed on to its ancestors genetically. Don't see how that's possible. And then from step 2 you'd go to step 3, but you can't really go from step 2 to step 3 because step 2 is just what we call simple branching, and step 3 is compound branching. And you can't really get compound branching from simple branching, but I'm not here to really explain it to you. I'm just telling you what the evolutionists say. And then from this compound branch structure, you get another level of compound branching, and then this begins to look like a feather. And so evolutionists imagine that a reptilian scale went through those steps. Well, of course, they have no evidence that it really did go through those steps, and we might ask, why would a scale do that? Why would that be selected for? And evolutionists have spent a great deal of time trying to speculate on just how and why feathers evolved from reptile scales. There are really 3 basic theories. One's called the arboreal theory, or the tree theory, and it isn't really a theory at all since there's nothing testable about it. You could call it simply the arboreal speculation. And in this speculation, they say that the pre-bird, the proto-bird, had these long scales, and these scales maybe got a little frayed. And then this reptile crawled up into the trees. Now, don't ask me why, but he either fell out or jumped off. And when he or she did this, those reptiles having the longest and most frayed scales hit the ground less hard because these kind of caught the air on the way down. And those that had the less frayed scales, the end of that one. And then presumably those who hit the ground less hard crawled up in the tree and tried it again until one day took off and flew, complete with navigation and all of the other features that birds have. Now, I want you to know that not all evolutionists are taken in by this idea of the arboreal theory. In fact, many evolutionists have pointed out the problem with this theory is there's not the slightest shred of evidence to support it. That is a problem. So this group has come up with an alternative theory called the cursorial theory. And so in the cursorial theory, the scales, again, are long and frayed, only in this idea, these pre-birds, or these reptiles with the frayed scales, used those scales to catch insects. So they ran around doing this. Well, being of a rather experimental bent myself, I took some styrofoam board and I cut it in the shape of the wing, and then you see the insect up here he's chasing. I took a piece of tissue paper and tied it to a thread from a rafter in my basement, And then I put on the styrofoam wings, and I snuck up on the tissue paper, and I took my wings and I did that. Do you have any idea what happened? I mean, I can't believe this. This piece of tissue paper, not a speck of life in it, and it flew away. Well, the people who believe in the arboreal theory have criticized the cursorial theory by pointing out, and quite accurately so, that there's not the slightest shred of evidence to support it. And people have asked me, what do I think? And I say, I think they're both right. There's not the slightest shred of evidence to support either one. Well, there is one other theory. It's really the oldest of the three theories, the thermoregulatory theory, that say that reptilian scales evolved into feathers to keep the reptiles warm as they evolved into warm-blooded creatures. Of course, this involves all kinds of assumptions. But what about that theory, the thermoregulatory theory? Alan Fiducia, who's one of the great bird people, ornithologist, who has studied the evolution of birds and is an evolutionist, has very serious doubts about birds having evolved from dinosaurs. And he says, indeed, the simplest and most profound objection to all the thermoregulatory theories is why feathers? Feathers are extremely complicated, both structurally and embryologically in their development, and that is certainly true. And yet today, the idea of feathered dinosaurs has become very popular, thanks largely to the National Geographic magazine and Nature and other magazines. And in this issue, published in 1998, they proudly announced that dinosaurs take wings, the origin of birds. And it was about the feathered dinosaurs that have been found in China. And in this issue, they said, we can now say that birds are theropods, that is, T-Rex type dinosaurs with the little tiny front limbs. We can now say that birds are theropods just as confidently as we can say humans are mammals. So this is what you really call confidence here. And they were speaking of fossils that have been found in the northeast part of China. And up here in Liaoning province, they've been digging up all sorts of fossils, not just dinosaurs and birds, but lots of other kinds of creatures too, typically all kind of mixed together in chaos, aquatic creatures, flying creatures, terrestrial creatures. And one of the first so-called feathered dinosaurs that was reported was called Sinosauropteryx. You see it on the left here. You take one look at this thing and you know it's not a bird. It has a long tail, has this big rump, big hind limbs, tiny little front limbs. It is a typical theropod type dinosaur, like a little miniature T-Rex. But what got them excited is if you look along the back.
Okay.
So I have a question.
When I
on
get
this.
texts from my audience, I think we've had
So was this presented at a scientific conference of paleontologists?
this was at a creationist conference.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Big
so-
surprise.
Because he would be laughed off the fucking stage. So I'm sorry.
Whoa!
He would be laughed off
Okay.
the stage presenting that kind of ridiculous,
I'll edit that out.
ridiculous, poor lot. There's so many problems with his talk there. It's hard. We'd be here hours
Who
going
has
through them.
the donation cup?
It's over there
Like I said before, he speaks to the top 1% of medical students in America. He is,
at a creationist conference. That's who he was speaking to.
well, it doesn't matter where he's speaking at. I mean, the information
Well, it
is,
doesn't matter.
the information is the same.
If he's speaking to the top 1% of medical students, he's not giving this talk, is he?
Well, I mean, he can speak in a lot. I've got another one where he speaks so technically that nobody here is going to understand him probably. But yes,
But
I mean,
we can use that as an appeal to authority to say that he speaks to the top 1% of
well,
medical
he's trying to
students,
make
and
stuff
therefore
so you
everything-
can understand
everything
it. Just
says
because he doesn't
is
use words that you
wild.
can't understand doesn't mean he's not qualified.
There's still validity in what he's saying, though.
No.
You don't. You
I
may
could-
not
we could
agree.
literally
That's
spend
fine.
hours
You don't have to.
dissecting Just that 5 minutes of what he went through, I could shoot holes all night long. and
Why don't you
back
just
to
give,
stuff that he
why
was
don't you
saying.
give one then, and that way we'll have enough time.
Okay,
One
let's go back
One
to
what?
the point where he
Hole.
talks about
Hole?
the
It says lots of holes, one hole.
he starts saying that, the lizard crawled up in the tree and then it jumped out of the tree. It's like, first of all, I'm curious when this talk was given, because That's not the current modern theory of how wings evolve.
Well, he's mocking, I think, a little bit there. I don't even think that
Hey, there you go.
scientists
Right on
would
the
say
nose.
that. But I think that that Dave and Dave here and all young creationists have a problem is that they're 1% of 99% of Earth scientists that are studying nature and probably hundreds of different types of fields of study agree that evolution took place. Now, you have to admit, if you believe in 1%, no matter how strongly you believe in 1%, and then you do believe in other parts of science that comes about with the same scientific method, you have a problem. The problem is that you believe in vaccines, medicine, planes, cars, engineering, iPhones, the internet, anything that has to do with the scientific method, except for those fields of study that your religion disagrees with.
No, we're talking about science here, Bruce. Look at the difference between scales and feathers. Feathers have follicles. They're growing individual, like hairs. There's no comparison. Yet the scientists are saying over and over again that they're very similar. That's what they're saying. They're lying to you. You have to be gullible to be an atheist.
I do not know the current theory, and I'm sure if we had a naturalist here or a paleontologist here, he would have.
I'm not saying, you know, you can be very intelligent and still be gullible. That's all I'm saying, because you believe people.
Who's gullible?
That applies to you too, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's a matter of intelligence. I'm just saying sometimes you want to believe something so badly that you believe it. You know, in spite of the evidence, not because of it. I'm saying because of the evidence, you see that there's a difference here.
Science doesn't work that way. We don't decide that something is true.
What you just said, Dave, was more
And then go
of the
to
believers.
prove
You
it.
want to
That's not
believe it
science.
so much that you believe it.
That's a hypothesis.
Well, if they want to.
Well, I'm saying the evidence doesn't support what you're saying. That's what I'm saying.
I say that you're wrong and you have very poor knowledge of the evidence. I'm sorry, that's just.
That's what you can say, but that's not true.
Atheists
What
will.
they do is they say,
I'm sorry?
you've got this complexity, you know, here, and they break it, this guy broke it down very simply, you know, the way the feathers were
This guy
formed.
right here,
The guy we just saw in the video.
the guy that was saying.
David mentioned-
Here's three of them, the arboreal speculation, the cursorial, and the thermoregulator.
Just because he did it in a
Broke
very
down simply
simplistic
does
way,
not make it
So he
true.
could make it understandable to people, you know, anybody who's
If
watching
you,
it.
if you're,
However,
if you're
then
intellectual.
everybody comes along and says,
Go on,
well,
you finish,
it's
go
way
ahead.
more complex than that, you know, we add millions of years to it, and then this and that has all happened and occurred. It still doesn't really make it, you know, necessarily plausible to a lot of people.
But is it that hard to believe that life is complex and hard to understand? Especially if you look at life, if you look at life, if you assume that life exists over, say, the last billion years on Earth, it's a very long time, right? It's very complex, it's hard to understand. I mean,
So you're saying that you have to accept evolution as a scientific fact equally as you would accept biology, chemistry, physics,
Well,
mathematics?
it has to do with evolution, yes, because what atheists do is we don't have the time to go and actually do the studies. But what we do rely upon is a consensus of science. We never say it's 100%. We always say it could be wrong. Science has been wrong in the past. As science gets more sophisticated, those wrongs are being very rare now. There's so much facts that evolution is true from multiple different fields of study that it's very difficult for me or most people that are into science can say, how can so many people be wrong? We're talking about 99.5% of anybody who is involved in earth sciences. They all agree. Only 0.5% are young earth creationists. Now I'm not saying that the young earth creationists are wrong, but what the young earth creationists usually do is they present problems with evolution. And yes, there are some problems with evolution. We don't know everything about it yet. But that doesn't mean that it's false. We have to take a look at the consensus. And remember, you're talking about, there's just 17,000 paleontologists in the world. All of them agree that this is true. And they don't just bring a fossil to a convention and say, look what I found. And everybody says, yes, yes, of course. They argue for sometimes decades on one small fossil. before they decide to have a consensus. It's like tectonic theory, plate theory. Nobody believed that because there was no evidence. It took 25 years for the guy digging, dragging a thermometer across the Atlantic rift when the water temperature went up and went down, and he hypothesized that the plates were slipping. It took him 25 years at annual conventions to give this information. Now that's pretty solid when you have convinced 1,700 paleontologists or 28,000, excuse me, did I say 17,000, or 28,000 geologists that something is true. I have to believe, temporarily, that these people have their shit together. That's what I have to
I
believe.
think it'd be better temporary, because I think underlying a lot of what you've said here and what we went through last month is an appeal to authority.
No, that is not the appeal to authority when it's a consensus. An appeal to authority is when you have one person talking up on a screen.
And you,
That's
and you
an
say
appeal
he
to
talks to 1% of the top 1% of
That's
medical
right. You
students.
see,
That's
I
an appeal
don't
to
believe one
authority.
scientist. I believe 17,000 paleontologists. I believe 28,000 geologists when they come up with a consensus. And
Not
again,
because they're geologists, but because they fight each other about
that's right.
who
They
can
fight,
prove what's
and
true
all of
and
them,
what's not.
after years and years of fighting among multiple different types of issues, they come to a consensus. I have faith or trust, more like I say confidence. When I say faith, I mean confidence. If you look up the word faith, it has about 15 different meanings.
So you don't really care about facts as long as they agree on something.
I
It
care
can be
about
wrong.
consensus.
The point is that
and
it's
I'm not saying
science.
that there could be
And even though we don't specifically know all the
right.
details.
I'm not saying that they're 100% right.
Well, I mean, you have to
Well,
listen to the thoughts.
You have to bring something to the table besides just putting down evolution. There, like for instance, if you said, look at this rabbit's foot that is right in the middle of bacterium or algae, 2.5 billion years ago, that would be Nobel Prize winning work. Give us something back.
I believe that was Stephen Jay Gould, that was his thing, which was what would prove that evolution was false.
That's
Rabbits
right.
and the Devonian.
And that's what evolution is. Evolution is falsifiable. Bring us something. We will listen. Bring, meaning that from the young earth creationist standpoint, bring us something that we can really put our finger on and talk about for decades, and then we'll say you're right. But all you do is put down the little tiny nuances of evolution here and there, things that we haven't figured out yet. Abiogenesis, we haven't figured that out
Little
yet.
things like creation of existence of matter, the existence of life, the order and complexity, little things like that.
And think that we're eventually going to figure that out? I think
that's
What
a
happens is
that's a hope. That's a hope.
you go to
It's a
what we
belief
call
until you try.
reductionism. Reductionism
Well,
is simply
we
taking
have
something and
nomenclatures
studying
that are
it.
different.
The more you study something, the parts of something, for example, looking at through an electron microscopy, where we can actually see not only DNA, but sRNA, mRNA, nRNA, all the various details. The more you study it, the closer you get, the more complex you realize it is, the more it points to God.
And how did we figure out how complex it is?
So just seeing
Through
the
belief
parts of
or
it
through science?
doesn't,
You're taking new discoveries in science and using it against
no,
science.
science and creation go together. It's evolution that is not scientific.
In the 40s, you would have been arguing, saying that no way to prove that traits are inherited from one individual to the next. It wasn't until the 50s and 60s that they
And I
discovered
forgot the names
DNA.
of
Yeah.
those two wonderful
But,
gentlemen.
but I don't know of anything
It did
that,
amazing
I don't know of
experiments
anything that
life
evolution
proved.
is
Which
found
proved
to
that
be
a
scientific. Is there,
method,
name one thing about evolution that's
What's your
scientific.
name, ma'am?
Name one thing.
One thing about evolution that's scientific.
There's
Let's
entire
listen to her.
libraries.
Okay.
Yes.
We have Zella back
Yeah,
here
Zella,
that would like
okay.
to ask a
I just
question.
have a question. From an evolution standpoint, are you saying that blood involved in reproductive systems and the sexes, and I have this hand with equal number of fingers, and the blood in my body and all of that? I just want to know, because I want to understand both sides. That all evolved and it functions properly with no control.
Well,
over
it's
what
self-control.
Correct.
Okay, that's I just want to make sure, because I want to know.
I
understand both
agree,
sides.
it did
The
evolve.
answer to that is yes.
And so the eye, the
Yes.
ear,
The
brain.
eye didn't evolve
Okay, that's all I
once.
wanna know.
The eye evolved at least 23
Well, there's
was the
been
last
5
time.
mass extinctions on the Earth, where more than 98% of life was, not each one, but very close to 95 to 98% of life was destroyed in these mass extinctions. And of those mass extinctions, the eye was partly developed, and the life was gone. In fact, at one point in evolution of Earth, the entire Earth was covered with ice. It was an ice. If you looked at it from the outside of an alien spacecraft going by, there's no life there. It's just full of ice. It was true. It was, for 20 million years, Earth was covered with ice. There were no mammals. There were no insects. There was nothing except bacteria. That was it. And that was after global climate change. It's kind of interesting to take a look at that. But if you look at something that's related to us, like apes or any of the hominids, they're almost like us. They have all the same body parts as we do, except they have a bigger gut because they're eating. They're almost like us. They just don't have the frontal lobe that we have. But they have all the same bones. In fact, whales have all the same bones that we have. Every mammal on Earth has all the same bones that we have, piece by piece. Every single bone. There's some minor quibbles with that, but most going all the way down to rats. Rats, by the way, were the one species that did exist after a mass extinction. And to discover this through evolution is almost majestic.
Where are you getting this information from?
Well, I've read about 15 evolution books, and Dr. Prothero is evolution. Read a book.
Well,
Read a book and
here's the
then
thing, is the
decide
way
for
science
yourself.
works.
I mean, who was there?
You can't just state,
Your
you can't just state
pastors
something
teaching
without
science.
evidence, right?
Yeah, I mean, you
That's
gotta
like
look at that.
Scientists teaching religion.
But if we
You
wanted
wouldn't
to, we
trust
could
them.
go down to the university that Don Prothero worked at, or one of the other.
Yeah, but I mean, you can make up stories, but
we could look at the bones
there's no
that they
evidence
dug
to
up.
support it. That's
We
just
can
kind of
look
like
at
the feather.
bones that they dug up, we can inspect those bones. We can
You
go and
don't
talk to
believe
the
the
other
bones are
paleontologists that
evidence,
have other bones in their collections, which relate to those bones that come from different areas at the same time frames. I mean, you actually can build up a story of how all these little bits of evidence come to be. The problem is that there's so much evidence, one person can't do it all. That's why you have to rely on what other people
You
have
come up
done.
with a theory,
And at a
like they
certain
did with
point-
Australopithecus afarensis, where the hips are basically a chimpanzee hip.
Right.
And Dr. Lovejoy
But
decides,
but
okay,
she's a million
they're
years-
not
but
they're
a
not
mil-
shaped
million
like
years
human
ago.
hips, so we take a power saw and cut them up and then paste them together and make them look more
Right,
human.
Australopithecus afarensis is not our direct ancestor.
No.
But
That's
we
an
have
offshoot.
more than just human DNA in our DNA. We have Desovian, and we also have Neanderthal. So we don't just have. I mean,
The Soviets actually recently discovered too.
yeah. I
in the
mean,
last
we're
15
not
years.
just human.
That's
I mean,
another.
not only are we evolved, we're not even just human. No human on this earth is just
It's
human.
just human. Yeah, that's correct.
So
Where do you get that?
DNA science.
I think what he means is that we don't just share DNA with chimpanzees and
Well, no, no,
bonobos. We share DNA with horses. We share DNA.
No, I'm not
with,
saying that.
No,
No, there's
we
actually
share-
other
yes, we
We
hominids.
share lots of
with
DNA.
bacteria.
Well,
We share
back-
DNA.
you can work your way as far as
But
you
we
want
actually
from
shared
humans.
a
We
DNA
still share
from
DNA.
interbreeding with Neanderthals and the
Now,
Soviets.
that's a great point, Damien, because suppose God did make us human without any correlation to any of these. Now, that would be partial evidence that something happened that was maybe supernatural. If we weren't related to Neanderthals, if we weren't related to Devonians, if we weren't related to chimpanzees, there's a DNA in all previous mammals where a virus inserted itself. I don't know what it's particularly called. You know the name for that? A virus enters the DNA and
Well, that's
attaches
RNA.
itself
Viruses use
in the
RNA.
DNA of the species. We have the exact same virus inserted in our DNA than we do in all of the hominids, all the existing hominids.
I'm just saying 4% of our DNA is Neanderthal.
That's right.
From
But suppose
outside
it
of
wasn't.
Africa and
Suppose it
in
wasn't.
Asia.
Suppose that our
up to
I would say
60%
100% is a
was
Neanderthal,
unique.
because Neanderthal was simply
did
a
not match any other mammal on Earth.
It's not.
That
You know,
would
the
be
DNA,
pretty
there
cool
is still a
stuff for
full
Christians
sequence
to
of it.
boast about. That would be extremely cool and
Had rickets
partial
lived during the
evidence
Ice Age?
that there might have been some type of
Neanderthal is 100% human.
What?
Neanderthal is 100% human.
2% Neanderthal in my blood. Have you had your DNA?
Check for Neanderthal? No.
Yeah, well, what
Oh.
Dave is talking about is the young Earth creationist view
Say I
that
look Neanderthal?
there was apes, and
Oh,
then there was
okay.
man.
Oh,
And
wow.
Neanderthal and Devonians and humans are part of that man. Is that correct?
Neanderthal was most likely found in Germany, and he was when you live longer, your face, your bone structure of your face continues to grow. That's, you know,
So
and
so God made Neanderthals and the Denisovans.
I would say that,
And Homo erectus and
All at the same time?
well,
because Homo erectus actually mated with the Denisovans.
it would be after the flood, and you've got Noah living 150 years after the flood, so Neanderthal was probably, you know, lived longer.
Dave, you just said something unique about the 350. Do you believe that certain individuals lived 900 years?
Yes,
Do you believe that
Methuselah lived
snake-
969
snake
years.
really did physically talk to Adam and Eve, or was it just like a,
Well, it wasn't a snake, it was a serpent,
well,
but after it was
do
judged,
you believe he actually did the talking thing?
the serpent spoke to
Serpent.
Eve, yeah.
What
Actually-
kind
actually
of
spoke to Eve.
communication it
And
was,
do you
we
think
don't
that, do you think that the donkey in the Bible actually spoke as well?
Sure.
Okay. Just
So-
want to
so
make
the-
sure we're on the same page here.
So
Yeah.
the serpent was blessed then, right? Because he was cursed supposedly to man's foot, and supposedly there was only one serpent, but then God blessed him to then more serpents? Because there's all kinds of
No, he
snakes.
was cursed because he ended up
No, so
becoming a
God
snake on the
first-
ground.
God was really liked beetles, because there's 44,000
No, but I'm just saying, if
of
the
beetles on
serpent
the earth.
could talk, and the serpent was what, a snake? I mean, what,
Doesn't say, it's a
so
serpent.
what animal do you think the serpent is? Did he die off?
Well, I think he
Or
ended
you're
up,
saying he's blessed?
He
now?
was- he was-
he ended up
without
becoming the
legs.
snake, I would guess,
So
because
then
that's what
he
it says.
evolved. So he evolved,
Well,
right? He evolved.
Or devolve.
Well,
You're
remember,
saying is
God,
he
he was
evolved.
on the
cursed,
young
and
earth
so he probably
creationist
lost his
viewpoint,
legs.
Things can happen very quickly. In fact, if you take the young earth creationist viewpoint.
But he evolved
with-
into all
let me
million
finish, please.
states.
With the conservative 1.4 billion species on Earth right now, after the flood, you'd have to have 7 new species a day. We're talking about a wolf, the next day you come out, a chihuahua, the next time you come out, there's a wolverine, you know, you have to have 7 new species a day after the flood. Now, that's a fact. There's 1.6, 1.4 to 1.6 million species out there. There's no,
Look how many stars you have, though. I mean, you can. look
and
how
that
many
has
stars
something
you
to
have
do
up
with
there.
evolution, how?
I'm just saying, look how many stars you have up there. If you're saying stuff evolved, I mean, can you have all kind of things going on? Look how many
Well,
stars
your
we have.
astronomy
But I have a question for you.
evolution, which I don't
No,
even
no,
think
but
is
we're
called
talking about
evolution.
Oh, yeah,
is
but I have a different
different
question.
than-
I just wanna know, this will help me for what you guys have going on here. How is it, this is just a question I've always wanted to ask. My fingerprints are different than his fingerprints, different than her fingerprints, and we all have different fingerprints. I wanna know, how do we get there? If you can help me with that, that'll kinda.
Well, I'll
No, it's a
answer it, and then I
question.
think
have a
Ray is
legitimate
gonna
question.
answer it.
question.
Yeah, I'm
The
just curious.
That's a really good question. I'm not gonna say miracle, because it's not rare that we have, a miracle is something that's very rare, like the lottery, for instance. You're right, everybody won the lottery. That's something that a biologist could probably answer a little bit better, but the more that I study evolution, the more I marvel at the majestic natural phenomena that we can discover. Science is not good unless you answer something with 2 more questions. That's science. It's a wonderful thing to not know. It's much better not knowing for a lot of people, especially scientists and scientist enthusiasts like myself, than knowing or pretending to know. Some people think that religious people, they're just pretending to know
So
because,
you don't have an answer while we all have different.
and it's wonderful not to have an answer. It's wonderful not to have
Okay, Bruce, can we finish?
I think, yeah, we gotta finish.
I have one more topic, and it's one that you probably want.
Well, so what I propose is this.
We've got different faiths.
I propose this, since it's getting a little on the late side, I hope this has been
We
entertaining
can continue
for
this
all.
over across the street
And I
if we
hope
want.
this has been, yes, we're gonna go across the street, whether you're indulgent alcohol or not, you're pleased to come over and ask us detailed questions. I'm going to let Dave handle the last
Okay,
nomination, and
this
then we'll
this is a one that the evolutionists most likely would like because it keeps coming up, and it came up at several of the debates, so I'd like to address it. And the idea is God a moral monster?
Yes. I thoroughly said yes.
Answering atheist claims about God's unjust treatment of the Canaanite cities. This was part 7B because it wasn't really part of the debate, but it ended up becoming part of it.
I'd still like you to answer my question.
Oh,
That how did God not set up the whole plan for man to fail?
Hey,
Okay,
hey,
we'll
please.
discuss that later. Atheist Richard Dawkins considers the Canaanite genocide one of the most morally atrocious aspects of the Old Testament. In his book, The God Delusion, he writes, the Bible story of Joshua's destruction of Jericho and the invasion of the Promised Land in general is morally indistinguishable from his invasion of Poland or Saddam Hussein's massacres of the Kurds and the Marsh Arabs. So what is God a moral monster? Well, the Canaanites descended from Canaan, the son of Ham, the father of Heth. So they were not Hebrews in the sense they were not descendants of Shem. Thus they were a separate race from the Semites. Their language was very similar to Hebrew, however. And here is the god Moloch. We know, for example, that at least 5 of these cities were offering up their children to Moloch for child sacrifice. So is God a moral monster? Well, let's look at some of the things that we need to consider. The Canaanites were sadistic and depraved. If one of your neighbors was acting like a Canaanite, you'd probably lock your door and call the cops. Canaanite culture was thoroughly depraved. It was guilty of barbaric acts like burning newborn babies alive, corporate rape, murder. Harvard scholar G. Ernest Wright explains worship of these gods, the Baalim, carried with them some of the most demoralizing practices then in existence. Among them were child sacrifice, a practice long discarded in Egypt even, sacred prostitution, snake worship on a scale unknown among other peoples. John Wenham, one of the greatest Old Testament scholars, writes, Moloch sacrifices were offered especially in connection with vows and solemn promises, and children were sacrificed as the harshest and most binding pledge of sanctity of promise. It's not surprising the Valley of Hinnom or Gehenna, where Moloch worship was practiced in the days of Manasseh, should have provided the Jewish image of hell. And so, and we got to look at this. In addition, Canaanites were the ones that first attacked the straggling Jews rather than the other way around. One of the Canaanite people, the Amalekites, attacked the Jews while they were traveling in the wilderness. In fact, they repeatedly attacked the Israelites, trying to pick them off. Faint and weary stragglers, the young men, the women and children, most likely a reference to the weak Jews. When the Jews were weak, the Canaanites tried to utterly wipe them out. As John Wenham notes, ancient armies in this territory did not hold captives. They defeated them totally. There would have been no mercy for the Jews. So, second, God is not playing favorites. Throughout the Bible, we see that God cares about all people. Even though the Moabites were utterly evil, God shows compassion on them in Isaiah 15:5. Even though the Assyrians and Egyptians oppressed the Jews, God refers to them as my people. Repeatedly throughout the Old Testament, we see God loves the foreigner, and he doesn't show preferential treatment. Even in predicting the destruction of the Canaanites, we see the same impartiality in God's character. God gave the Canaanites an opportunity to change. God waits patiently for all people to turn to him, and he remains slow to anger, Exodus 34:6. God had compassion on the Ninevites, relenting from judgment because they didn't know difference between their right hand and their left, in Jonah 4:11. In Ezekiel, we read that God takes no pleasure in the judgment of the wicked. In Jeremiah, God says, if the wicked will merely change their minds, at one moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to uproot, to pull down, or destroy it. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the calamity I plan to bring upon it. Jeremiah 18:7. If these men would have changed, God would have not judged them. And God allowed the Jews to rot in slavery for 400 years so that the Canaanites would have an opportunity to change. He didn't judge them immediately. Because of the sins of the Canaanites did not yet warrant their destruction. That is, they were not past the point of no return. However, by the time the Jews came for battle, they were. During this 400-year period, the Canaanites knew God was coming for them. God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, which were cities filled with Canaanites. By the time Jews stood at the border ready to fight, Rahab told them that they had heard God's judgment of Egypt. Therefore, the Canaanites defiantly ignored these warnings. And the images in Joshua were mild compared to what the ancient Near East, in the annals of Ashurbanipal II, take pleasure in describing flaying of live victims, impaling others on poles, of heaped up bodies for show. They boast of how the king mounted bodies and placed heads into piles. The king bragged of gouging out troops' eyes and cutting off their ears and limbs, followed by display of the heads around the city. The Hebrews were considered merciful. War was a bloody part of the ancient Near East. The Jews weren't fighting merely for their faith, however, they were fighting for their survival. It was kill or be killed. Again, what about the women and kids? Seeing the command to utterly destroy could have been a hyperbolic language which was consistent with ancient Near East war rhetoric. However, few more points must be made. First of all, the cities were military fortresses. They were not for civilians. That is, these cities may not have contained a lot of women. Copen writes, there is no archaeological evidence of civilian populations at Jericho or Ai.
Oh, that's not true.
Given that we know about Canaanite life in the Bronze Age, Jericho and Ai were military strongholds. The use of women and young or old was merely stock ancient Near East language that could be used even if women and young weren't living there. Third, what about the Canaanite children? Why did God kill the kids? As we've already pointed out, children were the most likely outside the judgment on Canaan. However, Joshua may have been using this rhetoric because they were military forces, not civilian cities. However, the children were, if they were killed, this may have been God's act of mercy. If the Canaanite children had grown up in this society, they would have become forced prostitutes, murderers, or even child sacrifice, roasting on burnt offerings. And even if they had survived that, they would end up spending an eternity in hell because they most likely would have become what their civilization was. So at this time, we believe that there is an age of accountability which these children would not have reached, and therefore they would spend eternity in heaven instead of the other way around.
Much more can be said if you read the book.
And so there's
also a book called Uncovering the Bible
So,
by an archaeologist.
I
This proves
want
all
to-
this.
I want to give Dave a hand for putting up with us tonight. Thank you, Dave.
this was the toughest one I've ever seen. So you guys,
Well, I'm
pretty tough.
see, you need these tough questions, you know?
Yeah.
Right?
No,
Good
I'm-
practice, right? Good understanding. So please hang around. Wayne and anyone else can give me a hand for bringing this stuff out to my car, and I'll meet you over at the post. I'm anxious to talk to you.
Help with constructing the room, do we help you?
I wrote a book.
Do you need help putting the
Or a
room?
book's not published
Yes,
yet.
actually, Damien, can you put, what we need is we need 6 rows, actually just put these in the rows, it's fine. Just leave the tables where they're at, that would be good. The rows with a central aisle would be
I studied
good.
archaeology for 3 years.
And that way
Oh,
the
I'm
city
not-
will like
I'm-
us
I'm
next
not-
time.
I'm just
we come.
asking
Thanks
if you
for the
happen to read that.
donations.
Is God a moral monster? No, I haven't. But to me,
Put it on your